My wife was cheating on me in our own house. Her shameless lover liked to swim in the pool while I was at work. So, I put a little surprise in the water. When he dove in, "My name is Adrian Cross, and let me tell you something about perfect lives. They're about as real as a $3 bill and twice as fake." Until 3 weeks ago, I was living what any red-blooded American would call the dream. Picture this: a gorgeous wife who could stop traffic just by walking to the mailbox, a house that would make your HOA president weep with envy, and a pool so pristine it could have been featured in Better Homes and Gardens. Hell, I worked my ass off for 15 years in construction management, clawing my way up from carrying lumber to running multi-million-dollar projects, just to afford that slice of suburban paradise. But you know what they say about dreams, right? Sometimes you wake up, and sometimes you get a bucket of ice-cold reality dumped right over your head. It was a Wednesday afternoon that changed everything. And I'm talking about one of those perfect October days where the sun's doing its thing without trying to fry you like bacon. I'd wrapped up early at the Morrison site, some fancy office complex downtown that was running ahead of schedule for once in my goddamn career, and figured I'd surprise Clara with an early homecoming. Maybe grab some steaks, fire up the grill, pretend we still gave a damn about each other's company. You know, married couple stuff. I pulled into our driveway at exactly 3:17 p.m. I remember because I checked my phone, thinking about how Clara wouldn't be home from her marketing job for another 2 hours. The house looked picture perfect as always, with those ridiculous flower boxes she insisted on, and the lawn I spent every weekend manicuring like some kind of suburban monk. But something felt off the moment I stepped out of my truck. The backyard gate was slightly open. Now, I'm the kind of guy who notices details. Comes with the territory when you're managing construction crews who'd screw up a two-piece jigsaw puzzle if you let them. That gate is always latched. Always. Clara's paranoid about neighborhood kids sneaking in, and honestly, so am I. We didn't shell out 40 grand for a pool just to become the unofficial community swimming hole. I walked around back, and that's when I saw them. Ripples. Not the gentle, barely, they're kind you get from a leaf falling or the pool cleaner doing its rounds. These were the real deal, the kind that come from something substantial moving through the water, something human-sized. My stomach dropped faster than a concrete block. The pool deck told a story I didn't want to read. 2 towels draped over the wrought iron chairs like they owned the place. Not our usual navy blue ones, but these fancy striped numbers I'd never seen before. A wine bottle sat on the side table, expensive looking with a label in some foreign language, and next to it, 2 glasses with lipstick stains that made my blood run cold. Here's the thing about my wife Clara. She's a creature of habit. She wears the same MAC shade, Rebel, or some dramatic bullshit name, and has for the past 8 years. I know because I bought it for her enough times. But this lipstick? This was coral pink, the kind of color worn by someone trying way too hard to look younger than her actual age. I stood there like a complete moron, staring at those wine glasses while my brain tried to process what my eyes were showing me. The logical part of me, the part that calculates load-bearing weights and schedules concrete pours, was screaming that there had to be an explanation. Maybe Clara had a girlfriend over. Maybe it was her sister, though Linda lives 3 states away and drinks beer from the bottle like a trucker. But my gut? My gut was telling me a different story entirely. The water was still warm when I dipped my fingers in, which meant whoever had been swimming was long gone, but not by much. I walked the perimeter of the pool like some kind of detective, looking for more clues I definitely didn't want to find. A men's Rolex sat forgotten on the far side table, not the cheap kind you pick up at the mall, but the real deal that costs more than most people's cars. That's when the pieces started falling into place like dominoes in my head. Clara had been different lately. Not obviously different. She's too smart for that. But different in ways that a husband notices after 12 years of marriage. She'd started dressing sharper for work, trading her usual conservative business attire for outfits that showed off curves I'd forgotten she had. Her phone had become surgically attached to her hand, and she'd developed this annoying habit of taking calls in the other room, speaking in hushed tones like she was planning a surprise party or coordinating a goddamn heist. Working late had become her favorite phrase, rolling off her tongue with the practiced ease of someone who'd been using it a lot. Budget meetings, client presentations, strategy sessions. Always something that conveniently kept her away from home until after dinner, looking perfectly put together despite supposedly being stressed to the max. And the pool. Jesus, the pool should have been my first clue. For months, I'd been coming home to find it spotless, the chemical balance perfect, the pH levels exactly where they should be. I'd assumed Clara had finally gotten serious about maintenance, maybe hired a service without telling me. But Clara hates the pool. Always has. She complains it's too much work, too expensive to maintain, too cold even in summer. The woman hasn't voluntarily gone swimming in our own backyard in 3 years. Yet somehow, magically, it had been pristine every single day. I sank into one of those fancy deck chairs, not one of ours, I realized with growing dread, and stared at the evidence of my wife's betrayal floating in the water like some kind of twisted crime scene. The ripples had settled, but the damage was done. My perfect life had officially become a perfect lie, and I was the last idiot to figure it out. The worst part? I could practically hear Clara's voice in my head, practicing whatever bullshit story she'd feed me when she got home. Some tale about a coworker dropping by, maybe a last-minute client meeting that moved to our house because of scheduling conflicts. She'd look me right in the eye with those green eyes I fell in love with 15 years ago and lie through her perfectly straight teeth. But I'd seen the ripples now. I'd seen the towels, the wine, the lipstick that wasn't hers. Most importantly, I'd seen that Rolex, expensive and forgotten like the marriage vows we'd exchanged in front of 200 witnesses who probably saw this coming before I did. My pool, the one I'd dreamed about through years of 12-hour days and weekend overtime, the one I'd saved for and planned and sweated over, had become the stage for my wife's afternoon delight with some mystery asshole who could afford to leave a $5,000 watch lying around like pocket change. The betrayal hit me like a sledgehammer to the chest. But underneath the hurt was something else. Something colder and more dangerous. As I sat there watching the sun reflect off water that would never look the same to me again, I realized that Clara had made one crucial mistake. She'd gotten sloppy. And if there's one thing I learned in 15 years of construction work, it's that when people get sloppy, everything eventually comes crashing down. The question was, did I want to be buried in the rubble, or did I want to be the one holding the wrecking ball? You know what's funny about being a complete and utter dumbass? You don't realize it until you're neck deep and stupid, looking back at all the neon signs you somehow missed while stumbling around in the dark. And brother, I missed more red flags than a colorblind traffic cop on his first day. For weeks after that pool discovery, I started paying attention like my life depended on it. Which, considering the state of my marriage, it pretty much did. It's amazing what you notice when you actually open your eyes instead of sleepwalking through your own damn life, like some kind of suburban zombie. Clara had been pulling away from me so gradually that I'd convinced myself it was normal married couple stuff. You know, the whole growing apart bullshit they write about in those relationship articles nobody admits to reading. But looking back with 20/20 hindsight, it was like watching a slow-motion car crash where I was both the driver and the poor bastard standing in the road. The work stress excuse had been her go-to line for months. "Oh, Adrian, you wouldn't believe the pressure I'm under at the agency," she'd say, massaging her temples like she was carrying the weight of the advertising world on her shoulders. "Johnson's breathing down my neck about the Peterson account, and don't even get me started on the budget revisions." Here's the thing about Clara's job at Hartwell Marketing. It's about as high stress as a Sunday afternoon nap. The woman sells advertising space for local businesses, not nuclear weapons to foreign governments. Her biggest crisis is usually deciding whether to put the pizza joint's ad next to the dry cleaners in the weekly mailer. But suddenly, she was acting like she was running campaigns for Fortune 500 companies and carrying classified documents in her purse. And sweet Jesus, had she started dressing differently. My wife used to roll out of bed looking like she'd rather be anywhere else, throwing on whatever blouse wasn't wrinkled and calling it a day. Conservative, professional, boring as watching paint dry. That was Clara's work wardrobe for 12 years. But somewhere around August, she'd apparently discovered that clothes could actually fit her body instead of just covering it up like some kind of fabric tent. The skirts got shorter. The blouses got tighter. The heels got higher. She started spending an extra hour in front of the bathroom mirror every morning, doing things with makeup I didn't even know were possible. I'm talking about contouring and highlighting and God knows what else. Turning her face into some kind of art project that probably required a degree to understand. "New look for fall," she'd said when I commented, giving me that smile that used to make my heart skip, but now just made my stomach turn. Jenny from accounting recommended this YouTube channel. You should try updating your wardrobe too, honey. Honey. She'd started calling me honey again after years of Adrian or nothing at all. Should have been a good sign, right? Wrong. It was the kind of honey you pour on poison to make it go down easier. The phone situation was what really should have tipped me off if I hadn't been walking around with my head up my ass like some kind of ostrich in denial. Clara had always been one of those people who forgot their phone existed half the time. She'd leave it charging in the bedroom, miss calls for hours, and generally treat it like an expensive paperweight. But suddenly, it was glued to her hand like some kind of technological growth. She'd get texts during dinner and actually check them, something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. Her phone had gone from sitting face up on every surface to being clutched protectively against her chest or stuffed deep in her purse where nobody could accidentally see the screen. And the calls. Dear God, the calls. They started happening around 9 p.m., right after we'd settled in to watch whatever mindless TV show was supposed to pass for entertainment. Clara would glance at her phone, frown like she was receiving urgent communications from the Pentagon, and excuse herself to take this in the kitchen. Then I'd hear her voice through the walls, soft and musical in a way it hadn't been with me in years. I can't talk long, she'd whisper, and I'd strain to hear more while pretending to give a damn about whatever reality show was flickering on the screen. No, he's right here. I know. Tomorrow, okay? Same time. When I asked who was calling so late, she'd wave it off with practiced casualness. Oh, just Mom. You know how she gets when she can't sleep. Or Linda's having issues with Dave again. Or work stuff. You wouldn't find it interesting. Right. Because Clara's mother, who goes to bed at 8 p.m. sharp every night like she's got military-grade discipline, was suddenly developing insomnia. And Linda, who'd rather eat glass than discuss her marriage problems with anyone, was apparently turning into Dr. Phil and seeking relationship advice from her sister. But the real kicker, the thing that should have had me calling divorce lawyers instead of making excuses, was what I started noticing about our pool. Every single day, I'd come home from work, usually around 6, sometimes earlier if the crew was ahead of schedule, and that pool would be absolutely perfect. Not just clean, but magazine cover perfect. The chemical levels balanced like someone had a PhD in pool maintenance, the skimmer baskets empty, the deck furniture arranged just so. Now, I'm not an idiot. I know pool maintenance. I've been taking care of that water feature for 5 years, and it's work. Real work. You've got to test the chlorine levels, adjust the pH, clean the skimmers, vacuum the bottom, brush the walls. It's a whole production that takes a couple hours minimum if you want to do it right. Clara hates the pool. Did I mention that? Because it bears repeating. The woman has complained about that pool since the day we had it installed. Too much work, too expensive, too time-consuming, too everything. She hasn't willingly gone swimming in our own backyard since Obama was president. She treats pool maintenance like it's hazardous waste disposal, complete with complaints and dramatic sighing. Yet somehow, magically, it had been pristine every day for months. Did you hire a pool service? I asked one evening, genuinely curious how our pool had achieved such impossible perfection. Clara barely looked up from her phone. What? Oh no. I've just been keeping up with it better. You're always so busy with work. I figured I should help out more. Help out more. Right. The woman who'd rather stick her hand in a blender than touch pool chemicals had suddenly developed a passion for aquatic maintenance. The lies were piling up like snow in a blizzard, and I was the moron standing in the middle of it pretending it was just a light dusting. Then there were the working late sessions that became as regular as clockwork. Every Tuesday and Thursday, sometimes Wednesdays too, Clara would text me around 4 p.m. with the same basic message. Budget meeting running long, don't wait up for dinner. Or client presentation needs tweaking, might be here until 8. Or my personal favorite, strategy session with the team. You know how these things go. Except I didn't know how these things went, because Clara had never mentioned strategy sessions in 12 years of marriage. Her job was about as strategic as choosing between regular or diet soda for the office break room. And when she'd finally come home, she'd look like she'd spent the day at a spa instead of grinding through overtime at a third-rate marketing agency. Hair perfect, makeup fresh, clothes unwrinkled like she'd just gotten dressed instead of wearing them for 12 hours straight. How was the meeting? I'd ask, because apparently I'm a glutton for punishment. Oh, you know, she'd say, heading straight for the shower like she was washing off evidence. Same old corporate nonsense. Johnson's being Johnson, the Peterson account is being difficult, blah blah blah. Blah blah blah. That's how my wife summarized her alleged career crisis. The same crisis that was supposedly consuming her life and keeping her away from home 4 nights a week. But here's what really killed me. The way she stopped looking at me. Not just the quick glances or distracted nods. I'm talking about really looking. For years, Clara would catch my eye across the room and smile, or steal glances during dinner, or just study my face while we watched TV like she was memorizing it for a test. That stopped completely. Now when I walked into a room, her eyes would slide past me like I was furniture. Expensive, familiar furniture that she was tired of looking at. When we talked, she'd focus on her phone, or the TV, or the fascinating pattern on our kitchen wallpaper, anywhere but my face. It's amazing how invisible you can feel in your own house when the person who's supposed to love you most starts treating you like background noise. The night everything crystallized was a Thursday in late October. Clara came home at 9:30 p.m., claiming another emergency strategy session, looking like she'd stepped off the pages of a fashion magazine. She breezed through the kitchen, kissed my forehead like I was her elderly uncle, and announced she was going to wash the day off. I followed her upstairs and watched her peel off clothes that smelled like cologne I didn't recognize, humming some tune under her breath that she definitely hadn't been humming when she left that morning. "Good meeting?" I asked. She said, not really listening. "Productive." That's when I knew for absolute certain that my wife was cheating on me, and I was the last poor bastard on earth to figure it out. The signs hadn't been subtle. They'd been screaming at me like a smoke detector with dying batteries. And I'd been too comfortable, too trusting, too goddamn naive to pay attention. Well, I was paying attention now, and somebody was about to pay the price. You can suspect your wife is cheating all you want, but there's a world of difference between suspicion and cold, hard, kick-you-in-the-teeth reality. It's like the difference between thinking you might have cancer and actually getting the test results back with a big fat, malignant stamped across the top. Until that moment, you can still live in denial, pretending everything's going to work out fine. Well, my test results came back positive, and the diagnosis was about as ugly as they come. I'd been wrestling with what to do about my growing certainty that Clara was playing house with someone else. Part of me, the rational, adult part that pays taxes and remembers to change the oil in my truck, kept insisting I should just confront her like a grown-up. Sit her down, lay out my concerns, have one of those mature conversations that marriage counselors are always yapping about on daytime TV. But there was another part of me, the part that had been burned before by trusting people who didn't deserve it, that wanted proof. Real, undeniable, photographic evidence that would hold up in divorce court and make sure Clara couldn't gaslight me into thinking I was the crazy one. So I did what any self-respecting suspicious husband would do. I decided to play hooky and catch my cheating wife in the act. The plan was simple, which in my experience means it was either brilliant or completely stupid, with no middle ground. I'd leave for work Thursday morning like normal, drive to the coffee shop about a mile from our house, and wait until Clara's car pulled out of the driveway. Then I'd circle back, park down the street where I could see our house, but wouldn't be obvious to anyone driving by, and settle in for what I hoped would be the most boring surveillance operation in history. Spoiler alert, it wasn't boring. Thursday morning started like any other day in suburban hell. Clara was up at 6:30, going through her elaborate beauty routine that had somehow expanded from 20 minutes to an hour and a half over the past few months. I made coffee, pretended to read the sports section, and listened to her moving around upstairs like she was preparing for a photo shoot instead of another day selling ad space to local businesses. "Big presentation today?" I asked when she came downstairs looking like she'd stepped out of a magazine spread. "You know how it is," she said, not quite meeting my eyes while she grabbed her purse and checked her reflection in the hallway mirror for the 15th time. "Peterson account is being demanding, and Johnson wants everything perfect." Right. The mysterious Peterson account that had supposedly been causing problems for months, but somehow never got resolved. At this point, I was pretty sure Peterson was either the most indecisive client in advertising history or a complete figment of Clara's imagination. "Well, knock him dead, honey," I said, injecting just enough fake enthusiasm to sound believable. She kissed my cheek, a quick, distracted peck that felt about as passionate as a handshake, and headed for the garage. I waited exactly 3 minutes after hearing her car pull out, then grabbed my keys and headed for my truck. The coffee shop was perfect for phase 1 of Operation Catch My Cheating Wife. It had big windows facing the street, decent Wi-Fi, and coffee strong enough to keep me alert through what could potentially be a very long morning. I positioned myself at a corner table where I could see the intersection that led to our neighborhood and settled in with a large black coffee and a newspaper I had no intention of reading. Clara's silver Honda passed by at exactly 8:15 a.m., right on schedule. She was probably heading to work like a normal person, ready to put in an honest day's effort selling advertising space, and definitely not planning to sneak back home for an afternoon rendezvous with her mystery lover. Or not. At 9:30 a.m., that same silver Honda came cruising back through the intersection, moving slow like someone who was making sure the coast was clear. I watched it disappear toward our neighborhood and felt my stomach drop into my work boots. Time for phase 2. I drove back to our street but parked 4 houses down, behind a massive oak tree that provided perfect cover while still giving me a clear view of our driveway. Our neighbor Mrs. Henderson was notorious for knowing everyone's business, so I pulled out my phone and pretended to be having an important work conversation while I watched our house like a hawk. At exactly 9:40 a.m., a silver SUV that definitely wasn't Clara's Honda turned into our driveway. My heart started pounding like I'd just sprinted up a flight of stairs carrying a bag of concrete. This was it. This was the moment of truth, the instant when my suspicions would either be confirmed or proven wrong. Part of me was still hoping I'd been paranoid, that this was all some massive misunderstanding that we'd laugh about later. That hope died the second the SUV's door opened. Out stepped the most stereotypical piece of shit I'd ever seen in my life. This guy looked like he'd been ordered from a catalog called Generic Douchebag Weekly. He was probably in his early 30s, with the kind of artificially perfect physique that screams, "I spend more time at the gym than most people spend at work." His shirt was so tight it might as well have been painted on, showing off muscles that had clearly never been used for actual labor, just for looking pretty in bathroom mirror selfies. But here's what really pissed me off. He walked up to our front door like he owned the place. No hesitation, no looking around nervously, no guilt or shame about what he was doing. He punched in the security code, our security code, the one I'd chosen because it was Clara's birthday, like he'd done it 100 times before. The front door opened before he even finished punching in the numbers. Clara appeared, and I watched my wife of 12 years throw her arms around this gym rat asshole like he was a soldier returning from war. They kissed right there in our doorway. Not a quick peck, but a full-on, grab each other's faces. Movie star kiss that made my vision go red around the edges. Then they disappeared inside my house. For about 10 minutes, I sat in my truck feeling like I'd been punched in the gut by a professional heavyweight boxer. This was really happening. My wife really was cheating on me. In our home, probably in our bed, with some muscle-bound jackass who looked like he bought his personality at the same place he got his protein powder. But the real show was just getting started. At 9:52 a.m., they came out the back door onto our deck. Clara was wearing a bikini I'd never seen before, red, tiny, and expensive looking. The kind of bikini worn by women who want to be noticed, not by wives who are supposedly stressed about budget meetings and client presentations. And Mr. Wonderful? He'd stripped down to swim trunks that probably cost more than I make in a day, showing off abs that looked like they'd been carved by Michelangelo himself. He was carrying a bottle of wine, the same expensive foreign shit I'd seen by the pool weeks earlier, and acting like he was starring in his own personal music video. But here's the part that made my blood pressure spike into the danger zone. He dove into my pool like he owned it. My pool. The one I'd saved for, planned for, sweated over. The one I'd spent countless weekends maintaining, countless dollars heating, countless hours enjoying in the few quiet moments I got between work and sleep. This steroid-enhanced pretty boy was doing laps in my water like it was his personal Olympic training facility. Clara slipped in after him, and I watched them splash around like teenagers at summer camp. They were laughing, splashing, swimming up to each other for underwater kisses that made me want to vomit all over Mrs. Henderson's perfectly manicured lawn. The worst part? They looked happy. Not just satisfied or lustful, but genuinely happy in a way Clara and I hadn't looked in years. She was animated, playful, younger somehow, Like this asshole had found a remote control to her personality and cranked up the brightness to maximum. I sat there for another hour, watching them turn my backyard into their personal paradise. They drank my wine, used my towels, lounged in my chairs, and treated my property like their own private resort. At one point, the musclehead got out to answer his phone, and I got a good look at his face. Damian Holt. I remembered him now. Some fitness trainer who'd been at Clara's office Christmas party last year. He'd spent the whole evening flexing his way through conversations and hitting on anything in a skirt, including my wife. I'd written him off as harmless, just another gym rat with more muscles than brains. Apparently, I'd been wrong about the harmless part. When they finally went back inside around noon, I started my truck and drove to the job site in a daze. I spent the rest of the day barking orders at my crew and trying to pretend my world hadn't just exploded like a faulty demolition charge. That night, Clara came home at exactly 6 p.m., looking perfectly normal and completely innocent. She kissed my forehead, asked about my day, and started making dinner like she was auditioning for Wife of the Year instead of Adulteress of the Century. "How was work?" she asked, stirring something on the stove. "Fine," I said, watching her perform this domestic charade. "How about you? Productive meetings?" "Oh, you know," she said with a dismissive wave. "Same old Peterson account drama. Nothing too exciting. Nothing too exciting. Right. Just an afternoon of playing house with her personal trainer in our backyard while I was supposed to be safely at work, none the wiser. But I was wiser now. I'd seen the enemy, and he had abs of steel and the brains of a goldfish. More importantly, I'd seen enough to know that this wasn't just an affair. This was a complete betrayal of everything we'd built together, carried out in my own home with my own stuff, while I worked my ass off to pay for it all. Damian Holt thought he was living the dream, swimming in my pool and screwing my wife, while I was out earning the money that made it all possible. He had no idea that his dream was about to become a nightmare. Here's what 15 years in construction teaches you. If you want to tear something down properly, you better know exactly where to place the charges. Rush the job, skip the planning, and you'll end up buried under a pile of rubble that used to be your life. But take your time, study the structure, find the weak points, and you can bring down the whole damn building exactly where and when you want it to fall. My marriage was about to be demolished, but I wasn't going in with a sledgehammer and a prayer. I was going to be surgical about this shit. The day after witnessing Damian Holt treating my pool like his personal water park, I called in sick to work for the first time in 3 years. My foreman Danny thought I was dying of something exotic, considering I'd shown up to job sites with everything from broken ribs to food poisoning without missing a beat. But this was different. This was war preparation, and wars aren't won by guys who show up unprepared. I spent the morning at Best Buy, which is apparently where middle-aged men go when their lives fall apart and they need spy equipment. The kid working the security camera section looked like he was barely old enough to drive, but he knew his stuff about surveillance gear better than some FBI agents I'd seen on TV. "So you're looking for home security?" he asked, probably wondering why I looked like I wanted to murder someone. "Something like that," I said. "I need cameras that are small, wireless, and can record everything without anyone knowing they're there." His eyes lit up like Christmas morning. "Oh man, we've got some sweet new stuff that just came in. Check this out. These little guys are about the size of a thumb drive, but they'll record in 4K with audio for up to 12 hours on a single charge." Perfect. I bought 6 of them, plus a wireless router booster to make sure the signal would reach every corner of my property, and a 2 terabytes external hard drive to store whatever evidence I was about to collect. The total came to just over $800, which was more than I'd spent on anything fun in months. But then again, this wasn't fun. This was justice. Back home, I spent the afternoon strategically placing my new toys around the house like some kind of demented Easter bunny. One went in the living room, hidden behind a picture frame where it could capture the front door and the stairs. Another went in the kitchen, tucked behind the coffee maker where it had a perfect view of the back door. The master bedroom got one mounted inside what looked like a regular digital clock on Clara's nightstand. But the real masterpieces went outside. I positioned 2 cameras with perfect views of the pool area, one disguised as a sprinkler head and another tucked into the outdoor speaker system I'd installed last summer. The final camera went in the garage, where it could capture license plates and faces of anyone coming or going. By the time I was finished, My house was wired tighter than Fort Knox, and nobody would ever know it unless they were specifically looking for surveillance equipment. Every angle covered, every entrance monitored, every possible piece of evidence recorded in high-definition glory. But hardware was only half the battle. For the really damaging stuff, the kind that would hold up in divorce court and make sure Clara didn't walk away with half of everything I'd worked for, I needed professional help. Marcus Lane owed me a favor, and it was time to collect. Marcus and I went way back to our college days at State, where he'd majored in criminal justice while I was learning the finer points of structural engineering. After graduation, he'd done a stint with the police department before going private, specializing in cheating spouse cases and corporate investigations. He was good at his job, discreet as hell, and most importantly, he understood that sometimes the law and justice weren't quite the same thing. I called him that evening while Clara was supposedly working late again. "Adrian fucking Cross," he said when he picked up. "Jesus, it's been what, 2 years? Please tell me you're not calling because you need bail money." "Worse," I said. "I need a private investigator, and I need one who doesn't ask too many questions about methodology." There was a pause. "Cheating wife. Bingo. Shit, man. I'm sorry. You want to meet somewhere and talk about it?" We met at Murphy's Tavern on the south side of town, the kind of blue-collar dive where nobody gave a damn about your personal problems as long as you kept buying drinks and didn't start any fights. Marcus looked exactly the same as he had in college. Tall, lean, with the kind of eyes that missed absolutely nothing. He'd always been good at reading people, which made him hell to play poker against and perfect for catching cheaters. I laid out the whole story over a couple of beers, from the pool ripples to the mysterious Damien Holt and his twice-weekly swimming sessions. Marcus listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or making notes in a small notebook he'd pulled from his jacket pocket. "So you've got the guy's name and you've seen them together," he said when I finished. "That's a good start, but it's not enough for what you're probably going to need in court. Judges these days want documentation, photos, videos, financial records, communication logs. The works. That's where you come in." "Damn right it is." He finished his beer and signaled for another round. "Here's what I'm thinking. You've got your house wired up, which is smart, but we need more than just footage of them playing house in your pool. We need to establish a pattern, document the affair over time, and most importantly, we need to follow the money trail." Money trail. Think about it, Adrian. This guy's not just using your pool for exercise. I'm betting your wife's been spending marital assets on him. Dinners, gifts, maybe even trips. Hotels cost money. Fancy restaurants cost money. And if she's trying to impress this personal trainer asshole, she's probably spending your money to do it. That hit me like a punch to the gut. I'd been so focused on the emotional betrayal that I hadn't even considered the financial angle. But Marcus was right. Clara had access to our joint accounts, our credit cards, our savings. For all I knew, I'd been bankrolling my own humiliation for months. "We need to get into her phone," Marcus continued. "Text messages, call logs, photo galleries. All the good stuff that'll prove this isn't just a one-time thing. We need bank records, credit card statements, anything that shows a pattern of spending on this relationship. How do we do that without breaking about 15 different laws?" Marcus smiled, and it wasn't a particularly nice smile. "Let me worry about the legal technicalities. You just focus on getting me access when the opportunity presents itself." Over the next hour, we hammered out a plan that would have made military strategists proud. Marcus would handle the financial investigation and background check on Damien Holt, while I focused on gathering video evidence and looking for opportunities to access Clara's phone. We'd meet weekly to compare notes and adjust our strategy based on what we discovered. "One more thing," Marcus said as we were getting ready to leave. "You need to be prepared for what we might find. Sometimes the evidence is worse than the suspicions, and sometimes people surprise you with just how low they're willing to go. Worse how? Could be other guys. Could be money you didn't know about. Could be that this has been going on a lot longer than you think." He put his hand on my shoulder. "I've seen marriages that looked solid from the outside turn out to be complete shams. Just be ready for anything, okay?" That night, I lay in bed next to Clara, listening to her breathe and wondering how many lies I was going to uncover in the next few weeks. She was sleeping peacefully, probably dreaming about her muscle-bound boyfriend and their afternoon pool parties, completely unaware that her husband was about to turn into her worst nightmare. The cameras were recording. The investigation was underway, and somewhere in the digital ether, the evidence that would destroy my marriage was piling up one pixel at a time. Clara had been playing games with my life for months, thinking she was smarter than the blue-collar construction worker who was too busy working to notice what was happening in his own backyard. She'd gotten comfortable, sloppy, overconfident in her ability to manage two relationships without getting caught. But she'd made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated me. I might not have a college degree in criminal justice or a fancy office downtown, but I knew how to plan a project from start to finish. I knew how to manage timelines, coordinate resources, and execute complex operations under pressure. Most importantly, I knew how to tear things down so completely that there was nothing left but empty space and regret. Phase 1 was complete. The surveillance network was operational, Marcus was on the case, and my cheating wife had no idea that her perfect little affair was about to become the most expensive mistake she'd ever made. Now came the fun part, watching her world crumble in real time while she smiled and lied to my face every single day. Construction workers know how to build things, but we also know how to demolish them. And Clara's house of lies was about to come down harder than a condemned building in an earthquake zone. The only question was whether she'd see it coming before the roof caved in on her perfectly sculpted head. You know what they say about revenge being a dish best served cold? Well, whoever came up with that saying obviously never had to deal with a cheating wife and her muscle-bound boy toy turning their backyard into a goddamn love nest. Sometimes revenge needs to be served hot, slimy, and with enough amphibian backup to make a grown man question his life choices. 2 weeks into my surveillance operation, I had enough evidence to bury Clara and Damien in any divorce court in the country. Marcus had been earning his fee like a champ, documenting their Tuesday and Thursday afternoon pool parties with military precision. We had timestamps, photographs, video footage, and even audio recordings of their pillow talk that would make a porn director blush. But here's the thing about evidence. It's great for lawyers and judges, but it doesn't do jack shit for the burning rage that was eating me alive from the inside out. Every night, I'd lie in bed next to my cheating wife, listening to her fake sleep while she probably fantasized about her next underwater wrestling match with Captain Protein Powder. Every morning, I'd kiss her goodbye and watch her drive off to work, knowing damn well she was planning another afternoon of adultery in my own backyard. I needed more than evidence. I needed satisfaction. I needed to see the look on Damien's face when his perfect little fantasy turned into a nightmare. I needed him to understand that actions have consequences, and sometimes those consequences come with teeth and a really bad attitude. That's when inspiration struck, courtesy of my nephew Tyler and his 5th grade science project. Tyler had been raising bullfrog tadpoles for the past month, watching them grow from little black dots into proper frogs in a big aquarium tank in his bedroom. His mom, my sister Jenny, had been complaining about the smell and the noise for weeks, begging someone to take them off her hands before she accidentally flushed the whole ecosystem down the toilet. I volunteered to solve her problem. "Uncle Adrian, you sure you want these things?" Tyler asked as we loaded the tank into my truck. "They're kind of gross, and they make this weird chirping noise at night." "Trust me, kid. I've got the perfect pond for them." Of course, I didn't have a pond, but I had something better, a heated, chlorinated swimming pool that was about to become an amphibian paradise. The plan was beautiful in its simplicity. I'd wait for Clara to leave for work on Thursday morning, then set up my living surprise before Damien arrived for his regularly scheduled pool humping session. The cameras would capture everything, and I'd finally get to see what that pretty boy looked like when his perfect world got a little less perfect. I drove to 3 different pet stores to supplement Tyler's collection, telling each clerk that I was setting up a large outdoor pond and needed enough frogs to establish a healthy ecosystem. By the time I was finished shopping, I had 2 massive aquarium tanks full of bullfrog tadpoles, 6 adult bullfrogs the size of dinner plates, and about 50 smaller frogs that the last pet store owner was practically giving away because they were too aggressive for most customers. Perfect. Aggressive was exactly what I was looking for. Thursday morning played out like every other day in suburban hell. Clara went through her elaborate beauty routine, claimed she had another challenging day ahead with the Peterson account, and drove off to work looking like she was headed to a photo shoot instead of a marketing office. I gave her the usual 10-minute head start, then loaded my amphibian army into the truck and headed home. Setting up the surprise took longer than I'd expected. The adult bullfrogs were about as cooperative as construction workers on a Monday morning, and the tadpoles seemed determined to escape every container I put them in. But eventually, I had the whole crew relocated to my pool, swimming around like they'd just discovered frog heaven. The big bullfrogs immediately claimed the shallow end as their territory, while the smaller ones spread out across the deep end like tiny green submarines. The tadpoles were everywhere, turning the crystal-clear water into a writhing mass of aquatic life that looked like something out of a nature documentary gone wrong. I pulled the pool cover halfway across, leaving just enough open water to make it look normal from a distance, then settled into my truck down the street to wait for the show. Damien's silver SUV pulled into my driveway at exactly 9:40 a.m., right on schedule. I watched him strut up to the front door like he was walking a red carpet, punch in the security code with the confidence of a man who thought he had the world by the balls, and disappear inside. 15 minutes later, they emerged onto the deck, and I had to admit they made a pretty picture. Clara in another bikini I'd never seen before. This one was black and probably cost more than my monthly truck payment, and Damien in swim trunks that looked like they'd been painted on his artificially perfect body. He was carrying the usual bottle of expensive wine, gesturing dramatically while he talked, probably telling Clara some bullshit story about his latest conquest at the gym or his plans to become a fitness influencer. Whatever he was saying, it was making her laugh in that musical way that used to be reserved for me, back when I was stupid enough to think I was the only man in her life. They set up their usual poolside paradise, spreading towels on the chairs and arranging their wine glasses just so. Damien was showing off for Clara, flexing and posing like a peacock in mating season, completely oblivious to the fact that his private performance was about to have a very unexpected audience. Finally, the moment I'd been waiting for arrived. Damien walked to the edge of the pool, pulled back the cover with a flourish, and dove in without bothering to check the water first. The scream that came out of that man's mouth when he surfaced was worth every penny I'd spent on amphibian relocation services. Picture this. A grown man, supposedly the pinnacle of masculine fitness, bursting out of the water like he'd been electrocuted, with 3 bullfrogs clinging to his chest and about a dozen tadpoles stuck to his back. The look on his face was pure terror, like he'd just discovered that my pool was actually a portal to some frog-infested dimension of hell. He tried to swim to the ladder, but every stroke brought him into contact with more frogs, and each new encounter sent him into fresh hysterics. The big bullfrog seemed to think he was playing some kind of game, following him around the pool and croaking encouragement while he flailed around like a drowning man. Clara was screaming too, but not in fear, in complete mortification. She was standing at the edge of the pool, trying to help her lover escape from his amphibian nightmare, while wearing an expression that suggested this was not how she'd planned to spend her Thursday afternoon. Damien finally made it to the ladder, but his grand exit was ruined when he slipped on a particularly large bullfrog that had taken up residence on the pool deck. He went down hard, landing on his perfectly sculpted ass while a chorus of frogs serenaded his humiliation. The best part? He was naked. Somewhere in his panic, he'd lost his expensive swim trunks to the murky depths of my frog-infested pool, and now he was scrambling around my deck like a hairless, terrified baboon, trying to cover himself while avoiding the amphibian army that had claimed his territory. Clara was trying to help, throwing him a towel while keeping her distance from the frogs, but even she couldn't maintain her composure in the face of such complete chaos. The sophisticated, confident woman who'd been lying to my face for months looked like a suburban mom dealing with a toddler's meltdown at the grocery store. It took them 20 minutes to clear the pool area, with Damien wrapped in towels and limping toward the house, while Clara gathered their belongings and tried to salvage some dignity from the situation. They never did find his swim trunks, which meant he had to make his escape wearing nothing but my wife's beach towel and whatever remained of his shattered ego. From my truck down the street, I recorded every glorious second of their humiliation, watching through my camera as 2 people who thought they were untouchable learned that sometimes the universe has a sense of humor about adultery. But this was just the opening act. Phase 1 was about embarrassment, about showing them that their perfect little affair wasn't as secure as they thought. It was about planting the seed of doubt, making them wonder if maybe they weren't as clever as they believed. The real fun was still to come. As I drove back to the job site, I couldn't stop grinning. For the first time in months, I felt like I had some control over my own life. Clara and Damien had been playing their little game in my house, with my stuff on my time. They'd been treating me like a fool who was too stupid to notice what was happening right under his nose. Well, now they knew I was paying attention. And if they thought a few frogs were bad, they had no idea what was coming next. After all, construction workers don't just know how to build things and tear them down. We also know how to make life really, really uncomfortable for people who piss us off. Phase 2 was going to be legendary. If you think frogs are scary, wait until you meet their bigger, scallier cousins who have absolutely zero sense of humor and a serious attitude problem. The frog incident had been a beautiful warm-up act, but it wasn't quite the knockout punch I'd been hoping for. Sure, Damien had screamed like a little girl and lost his designer swim trunks to the murky depths of amphibian hell, but the bastard came back the following Tuesday like nothing had happened. Apparently, getting sexually assaulted by a gang of bullfrogs wasn't enough to keep him away from my wife and my pool. Some people just don't learn the easy way. I spent the weekend thinking about escalation. In construction, when a gentle nudge doesn't work, you bring out the bigger tools. When a standard hammer won't drive the nail, you upgrade to a sledgehammer. When frogs don't send the message, you call on the reptiles. Marcus thought I was losing my damn mind when I explained Phase 2 over beers at Murphy's Tavern. Let me get this straight, he said, looking at me like I'd just announced my plans to join the circus. You want to put snakes in your pool? Not just snakes, I corrected him. Snakes, snapping turtles, and maybe a small alligator if I can find one that won't actually kill anybody. I'm going for psychological warfare here, not first-degree murder. Adrian, that's fucking insane. What if something goes wrong? What if one of these things actually hurts someone? Then maybe they'll think twice before using my pool as their personal love nest, I said, finishing my beer. Besides, I'm not talking about venomous snakes or full-grown gators. Just enough reptilian backup to make Captain Protein Powder question his life choices. Marcus shook his head, but pulled out his notebook anyway. Okay, assuming I can talk you out of this completely bats hit plan, what's your timeline? Thursday morning. Same routine as last week, except instead of frogs, our boy Damien gets to meet some new friends who are a little less cuddly and a lot more bitey. The problem with escalating from frogs to reptiles was finding suppliers who wouldn't ask too many questions about why a construction worker needed an emergency shipment of non-venomous snakes and baby alligators. Turns out, the exotic pet trade is alive and well in America, and if you know where to look, you can get pretty much anything delivered to your doorstep with minimal paperwork and maximum plausible deniability. I started with Reptile World, a sketchy-looking pet store on the edge of town that specialized in animals most people wouldn't want within 50 miles of their house. The owner, a guy named Snake Mike who lived up to his nickname in every possible way, didn't even blink when I explained my pond ecosystem project. You want variety or specific species? He asked, walking me through a warehouse that looked like something out of a nature documentary nightmare. Variety, I said, but nothing that's actually going to kill anybody. I need scary, not deadly. Got just the thing, Snake Mike said, stopping in front of a large tank filled with what looked like miniature dinosaurs. Snapping turtles. Mean as hell, scary as fuck, but they won't actually hurt anybody unless they're really trying. And these babies here, he gestured to another tank, are corn snakes. Completely harmless, but they look dangerous enough to give most people nightmares. Perfect. I bought 3 snapping turtles that looked like they'd been lifted straight from a prehistoric swamp and half a dozen corn snakes that were beautiful, terrifying, and completely non-venomous. For the grand finale, Snake Mike introduced me to his pride and joy. A 2-foot baby caiman that he swore was gentle as a kitten, but scary enough to make grown men wet themselves. You sure this thing won't actually eat anybody? I asked, watching the little prehistoric monster floating in its tank like a miniature submarine. Nah, he's just a baby. Worst he'll do is give someone a good nip if they try to pet him. But the psychological impact? Chef's kiss, my friend. Chef's kiss. I loaded my reptilian army into the truck Wednesday night, after Clara had gone to bed claiming another stress headache from the Peterson account. The snakes went into secure containers in the back, the snapping turtles got their own portable habitat, and the baby caiman rode shotgun in a small aquarium that barely contained his attitude. The plan was more complex this time. I couldn't just dump everything in the pool and hope for the best. That would be animal cruelty. And despite everything Clara and Damien had put me through, I wasn't about to take it out on innocent reptiles who were just trying to make a living in the exotic pet business. Instead, I set up what Marcus called strategic placement zones around the pool area. The snapping turtles would patrol the shallow end. The snakes would be positioned near the ladder and diving board, and the baby caiman would have the honor of floating in the deep end like a miniature lake monster. Thursday morning played out like clockwork. Clara went through her beauty routine, made her usual noises about work stress and difficult clients, and drove off to her job, looking like she was headed to a photo shoot for Adulteress Monthly. I gave her the standard 10-minute head start, then loaded my reptilian crew and headed home. Setting up Phase 2 took almost an hour. The snapping turtles were surprisingly cooperative, probably because they were too busy being pissed off at the world to care where they ended up. The corn snakes were more challenging. They kept trying to escape their designated positions, apparently unaware that they were supposed to be supporting characters in my revenge drama. But the baby caiman was the real star of the show. I released him into the deep end and watched him sink to the bottom like a tiny submarine, completely invisible from the surface, but ready to make a dramatic appearance when someone least expected it. By 9:30 a.m., everything was in position. I pulled the pool cover back just enough to make everything look normal from a distance, set up my camera equipment, and settled into my truck to wait for the main event. Damien's SUV arrived right on schedule, and I watched him strut up to the front door with the same cocky confidence that was about to get a serious reality check. He disappeared inside for his usual pre-swim ritual with my wife, probably telling her how the frog incident had been a weird fluke and definitely wouldn't happen again. Famous last words. They emerged onto the deck 20 minutes later, Clara in yet another bikini I'd never seen before and Damien looking like he'd stepped out of a fitness magazine. He was being extra macho this time, probably trying to prove that a few frogs hadn't damaged his masculine credentials. "Don't worry, babe," I could hear him saying as they set up their poolside paradise. It was probably just some kind of seasonal thing. Frogs migrate, or whatever. Today's going to be perfect. He walked to the edge of the pool, pulled back the cover with a flourish, and dove in without checking the water first. Again, some people really don't learn. The scream that came out of Damien's mouth when he surfaced next to a snapping turtle made the frog incident sound like a church choir. But the real magic happened when he tried to swim to the ladder and came face to face with 6 corn snakes who had apparently decided that pool time was their time too. I've never seen a grown man move so fast through water. Damien was doing some kind of hybrid freestyle panic stroke, trying to avoid the turtles while simultaneously staying away from the snakes, all while Clara screamed encouragement from the deck. But the piece de resistance came when he finally reached the deep end and the baby caiman decided to make his grand entrance. 1 second Damien was gasping for air, thinking he'd found a safe zone, and the next second he was staring into the prehistoric eyes of a miniature dinosaur that looked like it had crawled out of his worst nightmare. The sound he made wasn't even human. It was pure, primal terror, the kind of noise early humans probably made when they first encountered saber-toothed tigers. He launched himself out of that pool like he'd been shot from a cannon, landed hard on the deck, and immediately started crawling toward the house on his hands and knees while a turtle followed him like a slow-motion predator. Clara was in full panic mode, trying to help her traumatized lover while avoiding the reptilian army that had taken over her afternoon paradise. She was screaming something about calling animal control, but Damien was too busy having what looked like a full-scale nervous breakdown to respond. The best part was watching him try to stand up, only to slip on the wet deck and fall backward into the flower bed, where he lay twitching like he'd been electrocuted while a corn snake slithered past his head. It took them 45 minutes to clear the area this time, with Damien wrapped in towels and shaking like a chihuahua in a thunderstorm, while Clara tried to figure out how to explain this to someone, anyone, who might believe her. From my truck, I recorded every second of their reptilian nightmare, watching 2 people who thought they were living their best life learn that sometimes karma comes with scales and an attitude problem. Phase 2 was complete, and Damien Holt had officially learned that my pool wasn't the safe haven he'd thought it was. But we were just getting started. There's a fine line between revenge and stupid, and apparently I was dancing on it like a drunk college kid at a fraternity party. The reptile incident had been spectacular. Damien screaming like a horror movie victim, while a baby came and gave him nightmares he'd remember for the rest of his artificially enhanced life. But it had also been reckless as hell. Marcus had made that crystal clear when he called me Friday morning, his voice carrying the kind of barely controlled panic usually reserved for construction foremen who'd just watched someone fall off scaffolding. "Adrian, what the fuck were you thinking?" he said without bothering with pleasantries. "Snakes? A goddamn alligator? Are you trying to go to prison for aggravated assault with a deadly reptile?" "It's a caiman, not an alligator," I corrected, which probably wasn't the point he wanted me to focus on. "And it's just a baby. Snake Mike said it was harmless." "Snake Mike? Jesus Christ. Adrian, you're taking legal advice from a guy named Snake Mike? That's like getting financial planning tips from a bookie." He had a point. When you're getting your moral compass calibrated by exotic pet dealers, and your legal strategy involves terrorizing people with prehistoric animals, it might be time to consult someone with an actual law degree and a functioning understanding of the justice system. That's when I remembered Judge Richard Callahan. Dick Callahan had been my mentor back when I was trying to figure out how to turn my construction business from a one-man operation into something resembling a legitimate company. We'd met through the Chamber of Commerce about 8 years ago when I was bidding on my first major commercial project and had absolutely no idea how to navigate the legal minefield of government contracts. Dick had taken me under his wing, explaining the difference between proper business practices and the kind of shortcuts that land you in federal court with your dick in your hand, and a very expensive lawyer trying to explain why your ignorance shouldn't be considered criminal intent. He'd retired from the bench 2 years ago, but he still practiced law part-time and occasionally dispensed wisdom to idiots like me who thought they were smarter than the legal system. More importantly, he understood that sometimes the law and justice weren't exactly the same thing, and that good people occasionally needed to bend the rules to get the outcomes they deserved. I called him Saturday morning, after Clara had left for another mysterious client meeting that probably involved Damien and whatever therapy he needed to recover from his recent aquatic traumas. "Adrian Cross," Dick said when he picked up, his voice carrying that judicial authority that made you want to confess your sins whether you'd committed any or not. "I heard through the grapevine that you might be having some personal difficulties." The grapevine in a town our size was more like a high-speed information superhighway, and I wasn't surprised that word of my domestic troubles had reached the retired judge who still played poker with half the lawyers in the county. "You could say that," I said. "My wife's cheating on me, and I'm not handling it with the maturity and grace that the situation probably deserves." Dick chuckled, a sound that somehow managed to be both sympathetic and slightly ominous. "Why don't you come by the house this afternoon? Sounds like we need to have a conversation that's better suited for bourbon than telephone calls." Dick's house was everything you'd expect from a retired judge who'd spent 30 years listening to the worst of human nature and somehow maintained his faith in the justice system. It was elegant without being showy, traditional without being stuffy, and filled with the kind of expensive furniture that whispered rather than shouted about success. He met me at the door with 2 glasses of what looked like whiskey aged longer than most of my employees had been alive, and we settled into leather chairs in his study that probably cost more than my truck. "So," he said, settling back with the kind of comfortable authority that made you understand why lawyers charged so much just to sit in the same room with him. "Tell me about this wife of yours, and whatever poor bastard she's decided to torture you with." I laid out the whole story, from the pool ripples to the hidden cameras to my recent experiments in aquatic biological warfare. Dick listened without interrupting, occasionally nodding or raising an eyebrow when I got to the more creative aspects of my revenge campaign. When I finished, he was quiet for a long moment, staring into his bourbon like it might contain the secrets of the universe, or at least some guidance for dealing with idiots who thought snakes were appropriate legal tools. "Well," he finally said, "you've certainly managed to escalate this situation in ways that would impress a military strategist and terrify a criminal defense attorney. Is that good or bad? That depends entirely on what you're trying to accomplish and how much of your freedom you're willing to risk to accomplish it." He took a sip of bourbon and fixed me with the kind of stare that had probably convinced countless defendants to reconsider their testimony. "Adrian, I'm going to ask you a question, and I want you to think carefully before you answer. What do you actually want out of this situation?" "I want them to pay for what they've done to me." "That's not an answer. That's an emotion. What do you want?" Do you want your marriage back? Do you want a divorce that leaves you financially whole? Do you want revenge? Do you want justice? Because those are four very different goals that require four very different strategies. I thought about it while the bourbon burned its way down my throat, and Dick waited with the infinite patience of someone who'd spent decades listening to people work through the worst decisions of their lives. I want her to lose, I finally said. I want her to understand that there are consequences for lying and cheating and treating me like I'm too stupid to notice what's happening in my own house. I want that muscle-bound asshole to disappear from my life permanently. And I want to walk away from this with my dignity and my assets intact. Dick nodded like I'd just given the right answer to a particularly difficult legal question. Those are reasonable goals. Achievable goals. But the methods you've been using are going to land you in jail, cost you everything you're trying to protect, and probably get you sued by every animal rights organization in the state. So what do you suggest? Patience, planning, and a strategy that focuses on legal outcomes rather than personal satisfaction. He refilled our glasses and leaned back in his chair. Adrian, you've got evidence of adultery, you've got financial resources they don't know about, and you've got the element of surprise. That's a strong hand if you play it right. But you're playing it like a drunk gambler who thinks he can beat the house by betting everything on red. You need to think like a contractor again. What's your foundation? What are your load-bearing walls? What's your timeline? And most importantly, what's your exit strategy? Over the next 2 hours, Dick walked me through what he called strategic divorce planning. It was like getting a master class in legal warfare from someone who'd spent 3 decades watching people destroy their lives through poor decision-making and emotional stupidity. The cameras are good, he said, making notes in a leather-bound journal. The financial investigation Marcus is doing is excellent. But the animal incidents need to stop immediately. You're giving them ammunition to use against you in court, and judges don't look kindly on husbands who terrorize their wives' lovers with exotic pets. Even if the wives' lovers deserve it. Especially if they deserve it. The law isn't about what people deserve, Adrian. It's about what you can prove and what you can get away with legally. He explained how divorce proceedings actually worked in our state, the difference between fault and no-fault divorces, and how adultery evidence could be leveraged to protect assets and secure favorable settlements. It was like learning a new language, except instead of ordering dinner in French, I was learning how to financially destroy someone in legalese. The key, Dick said, is documentation, patience, and making sure that when this all comes to light, you're the sympathetic victim rather than the crazy husband who's been staging animal attacks in his backyard. So no more reptiles? No more reptiles. No more frogs. No more anything that could be construed as threatening, dangerous, or criminally stupid. He fixed me with that judicial stare again. But that doesn't mean you can't be creative within legal boundaries. What do you mean? Dick smiled, and it was the kind of smile that probably made opposing lawyers very nervous. I mean, there are ways to make people's lives uncomfortable without breaking any laws. Ways to apply pressure without leaving fingerprints. Ways to ensure that your wife's boyfriend finds other places to spend his time without involving any animals that might testify against you in court. Care to elaborate? Let's just say that sometimes the most effective revenge is simply allowing people to face the natural consequences of their own actions. And sometimes, he paused to take another sip of bourbon, those natural consequences need a little help to manifest themselves properly. I left Dick's house that afternoon with a new understanding of the legal landscape and a strategy that didn't involve potentially lethal wildlife. It was more subtle than my previous approaches, more patient, and infinitely more likely to achieve the outcomes I actually wanted. But most importantly, I left with the blessing of someone who understood both the law and the human need for justice, even when those two things didn't perfectly align. Clara and Damien thought they were playing a game with no consequences, operating in a world where their actions didn't matter as long as they didn't get caught. They were about to learn that getting caught was just the beginning. Sometimes the best revenge isn't elaborate schemes with exotic animals or carefully orchestrated psychological warfare. Sometimes it's just showing up at exactly the right moment and letting someone know that their perfect little secret isn't so secret anymore. Dick Callahan had been right about strategy and patience, but he'd also mentioned something about allowing people to face the natural consequences of their actions. Well, it was time for Damien Holt to face some consequences, and I was going to be there to document every beautiful second of it. 2 weeks had passed since my last reptilian adventure, and Clara had started to relax again. The mysterious pool incidents had stopped. Life had returned to what she probably thought was normal, and her Tuesday and Thursday afternoon sessions with Captain Protein Powder had resumed with their usual clockwork precision. What she didn't know was that I'd been using those 2 weeks to perfect my surveillance setup and plan what Marcus had started calling the direct approach. No more animals, no more elaborate schemes, just good old-fashioned confrontation at exactly the right moment to cause maximum psychological damage. Thursday morning played out like every other day in our suburban soap opera. Clara went through her beauty routine with military precision, made the usual noises about work stress and demanding clients, and drove off to her job, looking like she was headed to a magazine photo shoot rather than a marketing office that sold advertising space to pizza joints and dry cleaners. I followed my usual routine too, leaving 10 minutes after her and parking down the street where I could monitor our house without being obvious. But this time, instead of just recording evidence from a distance, I had a different plan in mind. At 9:30 a.m., I watched Damien's silver SUV pull into my driveway like he owned the place. The arrogant bastard didn't even bother to look around anymore. 2 weeks without amphibian attacks had apparently convinced him that the coast was permanently clear and his afternoon paradise was safe from interference. I gave them 20 minutes to get settled into their routine before I made my move. 20 minutes for them to strip down, set up their poolside love nest, and start feeling comfortable in their stolen sanctuary. 20 minutes for them to forget that actions have consequences and that husbands sometimes come home early. Then I drove my truck right into my own driveway and parked it where Damien couldn't miss it. The plan was simple but effective. I'd set up the pool the night before with a fresh batch of Tyler's bullfrog tadpoles. Not enough to cause real problems, but enough to create that slimy, unsettling feeling that had worked so well during Phase 1. Then I'd positioned myself in the shadows by the tool shed, where I could watch everything unfold while remaining invisible until exactly the right moment. From my hiding spot, I could see them clearly. Clara was lounging in yet another bikini I'd never seen before. This one was white and probably cost more than most people's monthly car payments, while Damien showed off his artificially perfect physique like a peacock in mating season. They were drinking wine from the good glasses, the ones we'd gotten as wedding gifts and were supposed to save for special occasions. Apparently, adultery qualified as a special occasion in Clara's book. Damien was in full performance mode, flexing and posing while he regaled my wife with what were probably fabricated stories about his latest conquests at the gym or his plans to become a fitness influencer. Whatever bullshit he was selling, Clara was buying it with the enthusiasm of someone who'd forgotten she was married to a man who worked his ass off to pay for the house they were using as their personal love hotel. You know what I love about this place? I heard Damien say as he gestured toward the pool. It's like our own private resort. No crowds, no noise, just us in paradise. Our own private resort. Right. Built with my money, maintained with my labor, and enjoyed by my wife's boyfriend while I busted my ass at construction sites to keep the mortgage payments current. That's when I decided it was time to make my entrance. I stepped out of the shadows just as Damien was preparing to dive into the water, and the look on his face when he saw me was worth every reptile-induced nightmare I'd put him through over the past month. "Enjoying my pool, Damien?" I said, my voice carrying across the deck with the kind of calm authority that comes from finally holding all the cards. He froze at the edge of the water, suddenly looking like a deer caught in headlights. Clara gasped and nearly dropped her wine glass, her face going pale as she realized that her perfect little secret had just been blown wide open by the husband she'd been treating like a fool. "Adrian," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not talking to you right now, honey," I said, never taking my eyes off Damien. "I'm talking to your boyfriend here, who seems to think my pool is his personal playground." Damien was standing there in his expensive swim trunks, his artificially tanned body gleaming with sunscreen and arrogance, trying to figure out how to handle a situation that definitely wasn't covered in whatever pickup artist manual he'd been following. "Look, man," he said, attempting to sound casual while his voice cracked like a teenager asking someone to prom. "This isn't what it looks like." "Really?" I stepped closer, pulling out my phone and opening the camera app. "Because it looks like you're about to go swimming in my pool, with my wife." using my towels and drinking my wine. But hey, maybe I'm misunderstanding the situation. The color drained from his face as he realized I was recording this conversation. Clara was making desperate gestures behind me, probably trying to signal him to run or lie or spontaneously combust, anything that might salvage this disaster. But Damien was trapped, standing there in his ridiculous swim trunks while I documented his humiliation in high-definition video that would probably end up as evidence in divorce proceedings. "Why don't you go ahead and get in the water, Damien?" I suggested, gesturing toward the pool with my phone still recording. "Don't let me interrupt your afternoon swim. I'm sure the water's just perfect for your needs." He looked down at the pool, probably remembering his previous encounters with my aquatic surprises, and I could see the internal debate playing out on his artificially perfect face. Did he risk another amphibian nightmare, or did he admit defeat and make a run for it? "Come on," I continued, enjoying every second of his discomfort. "Clara's been telling me how much you love swimming. Something about it being your private resort? I'd hate for you to miss out on your exercise routine just because the homeowners showed up." That's when he spotted them, dozens of small, dark shapes moving through the water like tiny submarines. The tadpoles were back, and Damien's face went from pale to green as he realized that his pool paradise had once again been invaded by creatures that didn't give a damn about his fitness model aspirations. "You're fucking crazy," he said, backing away from the water like it was filled with acid. "Maybe," I admitted, still recording his retreat. "But I'm crazy with a mortgage and property taxes, which means this is my pool, my house, and my wife you've been entertaining. How's that working out for you so far?" Clara finally found her voice. "Adrian, please, we can talk about this." "Oh, well, definitely going to talk," I said, finally turning to look at her. "But right now, I'm having a conversation with your boyfriend about his swimming habits." Damien was edging toward his clothes, which were neatly folded on one of my chairs next to his expensive watch and whatever other accessories he thought made him look successful. He was trying to retreat with some dignity intact, but it's hard to look dignified when you're half naked and being filmed while your lover's husband makes small talk about property rights. "Here's the thing, Damien," I said, following him with the camera as he grabbed his stuff. "I've been watching you two for weeks. I've got photos, videos, timestamps, license plate numbers, the whole package. So when you leave here today, and you're definitely leaving here today, I want you to think about whether this little affair is worth what it's going to cost you." "Are you threatening me?" he asked, trying to sound tough while clutching his designer shirt like a security blanket. "I'm stating facts. Fact 1, you've been trespassing on my property. Fact 2, you've been using my facilities without permission. Fact 3, I've got enough evidence to make your life very complicated if you don't disappear permanently." He was dressed now, but his hands were shaking as he fumbled with his keys. The confident gym rat who'd been strutting around my deck like he owned it was gone, replaced by a nervous man who was starting to understand that his actions might have consequences beyond getting laid twice a week. "Stay away from my wife," I said as he headed for the gate. "Stay away from my house. Stay away from my life. Because if I see you here again, the next conversation we have won't be nearly as friendly." He was practically running by the time he reached his SUV, and I followed him all the way to the street, still recording as he peeled out of my driveway like his ass was on fire. When I turned back toward the house, Clara was standing on the deck in her white bikini, tears streaming down her face and her perfect afternoon in ruins around her feet. "Now," I said, putting my phone away and walking back toward my cheating wife. "Let's talk about what happens next." The confrontation was over, but the real conversation was just beginning. Damien Holt had gotten the message loud and clear. My pool was off limits, my wife was off limits, and his days of playing house in my backyard were officially over. But Clara? Clara still thought she could explain this away, apologize her way out of it, or somehow convince me that what I'd just witnessed wasn't exactly what it looked like. She was about to learn that some things can't be fixed with tears and excuses. You know what's funny about catching your wife in the act of adultery? She still thinks she can talk her way out of it. Even with the evidence scattered around your backyard like confetti from Hell's own parade. Even with her boyfriend's tire tracks still warm in your driveway. She'll look you right in the eye and try to convince you that what you saw wasn't really what happened. Clara had spent the afternoon crying, pleading, and attempting damage control that would have impressed a political spin doctor. But I wasn't interested in her explanations, her excuses, or her tears. I had bigger plans for the evening, plans that involved the dining room table, several manila folders, and the complete destruction of her comfortable little world. After sending Damien running like a scalded dog, I told Clara we'd discuss everything when I got home from work. As if I was actually going back to the job site instead of spending the rest of the day at Marcus's office, putting the finishing touches on what Judge Callahan had taught me to call the endgame. Marcus had been busy during my weeks of animal-based revenge fantasies. While I was playing amateur zookeeper, he'd been doing the real work, following money trails, documenting patterns, and building a case that would hold up in divorce court like a concrete foundation. "Holy shit, Adrian," he said, spreading papers across his desk like a detective in a crime drama. "Your wife's been busy. And I'm not just talking about the pool parties." The financial evidence was damning. Clara had been using our joint credit cards to fund her affair for months, treating Damien to dinners at restaurants I couldn't afford, buying him clothes from stores I'd never heard of, and even paying for a weekend getaway to a resort that cost more than I made in a month. "Look at this," Marcus said, pointing to a credit card statement. "Romantic dinner at Le Bernardin. $300. New workout clothes from Lululemon. $400. Weekend at the Greenbrier Resort. $2,000. And here's the kicker. She told the credit card company you were aware of all these charges." That last part hit me like a punch to the gut. Not only had Clara been cheating on me with my money, she'd been actively lying to financial institutions about my involvement in funding her affair. In legal terms, that was fraud. In human terms, that was just plain evil. "It gets better," Marcus continued, pulling out another folder. "Remember that Peterson account she's always complaining about? The one that causes all her work stress and keeps her at the office late. Don't tell me. There is no Peterson account. I called her office pretending to be a vendor looking for payment information. Turns out, Hartwell Marketing has never had a client named Peterson, and according to her supervisor, Clara's been leaving work early every Tuesday and Thursday for the past 3 months. Of course, there was no Peterson account. Clara had been using a fictional client to cover her afternoon adventures with Captain Protein Powder, lying to my face every single day while I worked overtime to pay for their romantic escapades. But the real bombshell was in the third folder. Property records, Marcus said with the kind of grim satisfaction that comes from uncovering the really damaging evidence. 3 months ago, Clara tried to take out a second mortgage on your house. She was turned down because she doesn't have enough income to qualify on her own. But the paperwork shows she was looking for a $100,000 loan. $100,000? For what? According to the application, home improvements. But look at this. The contractor she listed for the work? Holt Fitness Solutions, LLC. Damien's personal training business. The pieces clicked into place like a construction project from hell. Clara hadn't just been having an affair. She'd been planning to financially destroy our marriage to fund her new life with her boyfriend. If that loan had gone through, I would have been on the hook for $100,000 that went straight into Damien's bank account while I was working my ass off to pay the original mortgage. "There's more," Marcus said, pulling out the final folder. "Bank records show Clara's been moving money from your savings account to a private account you didn't know about. Small amounts, a few hundred here and there, but it adds up. She's stolen about $15,000 over the past 6 months. $15,000. Money I'd saved from overtime, from skipping lunches, from working weekends and holidays. Money that was supposed to go toward our future, stolen to fund her present with another man." By the time I got home that evening, my shock had crystallized into something cold and calculating. Clara was waiting for me in the living room, still wearing that white bikini under a silk robe, her eyes red from crying and her face arranged in an expression of practiced remorse. "Adrian, honey, we need to talk," she started, but I held up a hand to stop her. "We'll talk," I said. "But first, I need to set some things up. Give me 10 minutes. I went to my home office and gathered everything I'd been preparing for this moment. The folders Marcus had given me, the surveillance photos from my cameras, the financial records that documented her theft, and the divorce papers Dick Callahan had helped me prepare. I arranged everything on the dining room table like evidence in a courtroom, then called Clara in to face her judgment. She walked into the dining room looking like a woman preparing for battle, probably expecting to deploy tears, apologies, and whatever manipulation tactics had worked on me for the past 12 years. But when she saw what was spread across our table, her face went pale and her confident demeanor crumbled like a house built on sand. "Sit down, Clara," I said, gesturing to the chair across from me. "We're going to review some documents together." She sat down slowly, her eyes scanning the papers like a defendant seeing the evidence against her for the first time. Which, in a way, she was. "Let's start with the financial records," I said, opening the first folder. "This is a credit card statement showing a $300 dinner at Le Bernardin on October 15th. Care to explain who you were dining with that night?" "Adrian, I can explain. I'm not asking for explanations. I'm asking for confirmation. Were you at Le Bernardin on October 15th? Yes or no?" She stared at the paper like it was written in a foreign language. "Yes, but..." "Good. Moving on." I opened the next folder. This is a receipt for workout clothes from Lululemon, totaling $412. The credit card used was our joint account, but the delivery address was to an apartment complex I've never heard of. Would that happen to be Damien's address? Her silence was answer enough. "And this," I continued, pulling out the resort receipts, "is documentation for a weekend getaway that cost me $2,000. A weekend you told me you were spending with your sister Linda, who, by the way, was actually in Florida visiting her in-laws that same weekend." Clara was crying now, but they weren't the manipulative tears I'd expected. These were tears of fear, the kind that come when someone realizes their carefully constructed lies are falling apart in real time. "Here's where it gets really interesting," I said, opening the property records folder. "This is an application for a second mortgage on our house. Our house, Clara. The one I've been paying for while you've been playing house with your boyfriend. Adrian, please." The loan was for $100,000, supposedly for home improvements to be done by Holt Fitness Solutions. That's Damien's company, in case you were wondering. "You tried to steal $100,000 from our home equity to give to your lover." She was sobbing now, but I wasn't finished. The bank records were the final nail in the coffin of our marriage. "And finally," I said, spreading out the account statements, "we have documentation of systematic theft from our savings account. $15,000 over 6 months, transferred to a private account I didn't know existed. Money I earned working overtime and weekends, stolen to fund your affair." I leaned back in my chair and watched my wife of 12 years realize that her secret life hadn't been nearly as secret as she'd thought. "So here's how this is going to work," I said, pulling out the divorce papers. "You're going to sign these documents, which grant me the house, the savings accounts, and everything else I worked for while you were screwing around. You're going to move out by the end of the week. And you're going to pray I don't decide to press charges for fraud and theft." "Adrian, you can't." "I can and I will. The evidence is overwhelming, Clara. You've committed multiple felonies, stolen from our joint accounts, and lied to financial institutions. The only reason you're not already in handcuffs is because I'm feeling generous." She stared at the divorce papers like they were a death sentence, which in a way, they were. Her comfortable life, her financial security, her carefully maintained reputation, all of it was about to disappear because she'd been too arrogant to think about consequences. "What about Damien?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What about him?" "He's not my problem anymore. He's yours. Good luck explaining to him why the money train just derailed." I stood up and looked down at the woman I'd married, the woman I'd trusted, the woman who'd stolen from me while screwing another man in our backyard. She looked small and broken, nothing like the confident adulteress who'd been living her best life at my expense. "You have a choice, Clara," I said. "Sign the papers and walk away with whatever dignity you have left, or fight this in court and let a judge decide how much prison time you deserve for fraud and theft." She picked up the pen with shaking hands and signed her name on every page, officially ending our marriage and my naivety in one legally binding document. "There's one more thing," I said as she finished signing. "Damien's been trespassed from our property. If he sets foot on our land again, I'm calling the police. And if you try to take anything that doesn't belong to you when you move out, I'll have you arrested for theft." Clara looked up at me with tears streaming down her face, probably expecting some final word of forgiveness or reconciliation. But I was fresh out of both. "Congratulations," I said, gathering up the signed papers. "You're officially free to build a new life with your stolen money and your unemployed boyfriend." I hope it works out better than this one did. The verdict was in, and justice had been served at my dining room table. 3 months later, I was standing in my backyard watching koi fish swim lazy circles in water that had never been clearer, and I realized something that probably should have been obvious from the beginning. The pool had never been the problem. The pool had just been the stage where my marriage died, and once the show was over, it was time to build something new on the same ground. The demolition had taken 2 weeks. Draining 40,000 gallons of water, breaking up concrete that had been poured with such hope 5 years earlier, hauling away the remnants of what I'd thought was paradise but turned out to be a monument to my own stupidity. My crew from the construction site had volunteered to help. Apparently, word had gotten around about Clara and Damien, and blue-collar solidarity runs deep when one of your own gets screwed over by people who think they're better than honest work. "You sure about this, boss?" Danny had asked while running the jackhammer that was turning my pool deck into rubble. "This thing cost you a fortune to put in. Cost me more than money to keep it," I'd replied, watching years of weekends and overtime payments disappear into a dumpster. Sometimes you've got to tear down the old foundation before you can build something that'll last. The Japanese garden had been Judge Callahan's idea, suggested over bourbon and war stories about other men who'd had to rebuild their lives from scratch after discovering that the women they trusted were better actors than most Hollywood professionals. "Water features are therapeutic," Dick had said, sketching rough plans on a cocktail napkin. "But koi ponds don't come with the same emotional baggage as swimming pools. Nobody's going to be doing the backstroke in 18 inches of water." He'd been right about the therapeutic part. Designing the garden, selecting the stones, choosing the plants. It had given me something to focus on besides the satisfaction of watching Clara try to explain to her family why she was suddenly living in a studio apartment and working double shifts to pay for basic necessities. The divorce had been finalized 6 weeks after our dining room confrontation, with Clara getting exactly what she deserved: nothing. Her attempts to claim spousal support had been laughed out of court once her attorney saw the evidence of systematic theft and fraud. Damien had disappeared faster than smoke in a windstorm once he realized his sugar mama was broke and facing potential criminal charges. Marcus had tracked him down to a gym in the next state over, where he was apparently back to hustling personal training sessions and looking for his next wealthy, lonely housewife to charm. Some people never learn, but at least he'd learned to stay the hell away from my property. The garden had taken shape slowly, like all good construction projects. The pond itself was modest, maybe 8 feet by 12, nowhere near the size of the pool it had replaced, but perfect for the space and my new needs. I'd built a small waterfall that circulated the water with a gentle sound that was somehow more peaceful than the mechanical hum of pool filters had ever been. The koi had been Tyler's suggestion. My nephew had become fascinated with Japanese culture after his bullfrog project, and he convinced me that koi were like aquatic pets that would never need walking or vet visits. He'd been right about that too. Watching them glide through the clear water was hypnotic in a way that chlorinated swimming pools never were. "It's like meditation," I told Marcus when he stopped by to see the finished product. "Except instead of emptying your mind, you're watching fish be fish and remembering that some things in life are actually simple." "And the revenge aspect?" he'd asked with a grin. "Getting any satisfaction from the fact that Clara's new apartment doesn't even have a bathtub, let alone a water feature?" "I'm not thinking about Clara anymore," I'd said, and realized I actually meant it. She made her choices, she's living with the consequences, and I've got better things to do than keep score in a game that's already over. That had been mostly true. I'd heard through the neighborhood grapevine that Clara was struggling financially, that her parents had cut her off after learning about the affair and theft, and that she'd been forced to take a second job waiting tables to make ends meet. Part of me, the petty, vengeful part that had enjoyed terrorizing Damien with reptiles, took some satisfaction in her downfall. But the bigger part, the part that was building something new instead of just tearing down something old, didn't need her suffering to feel good about my own life. The garden had taught me something about starting over that I hadn't expected to learn. Every morning, I'd sit on the stone bench I'd built near the waterfall, drinking coffee and watching the koi navigate their small world with what looked like contentment. They didn't seem to miss the vast expanse of the swimming pool, didn't appear to be mourning the loss of space they'd never actually had. They'd adapted to their new environment and made it home. I'd started doing the same thing. The house felt different without Clara's presence. Bigger in some ways, smaller in others, but definitely mine in a way it hadn't been when I was sharing it with someone who was only pretending to want to be there. I'd redecorated the bedroom, thrown out furniture that reminded me of her, and slowly replaced our shared possessions with things that reflected my actual tastes instead of compromises with someone who'd been planning to leave anyway. Work had gotten better too. Without the constant stress of wondering what Clara was doing during her mysterious afternoon meetings, I'd been able to focus on managing my crew and building things that would last. We'd landed 3 new contracts in the past month, and Danny had started making noises about me expanding the business and taking on bigger projects. "You're different now, boss," he'd said while we were reviewing blueprints for a new office complex. "More focused. Less, I don't know, distracted." "Divorce will do that," I'd replied. "Turns out it's easier to concentrate on building things when you're not constantly worried about someone tearing them down behind your back." The most surprising change had been dating, or rather, the complete lack of interest I had in it. Friends kept trying to set me up with their sisters or coworkers, assuming that a newly divorced man in his 40s would be desperate to jump back into the relationship market. But sitting by my koi pond every morning had taught me something about contentment that I'd never learned during 12 years of marriage. I liked my own company. I liked coming home to a house that stayed exactly the way I left it. I liked not having to negotiate over dinner plans or weekend activities or which TV shows to watch. I liked the silence that came from not having to listen to lies about fictional Peterson accounts and non-existent budget meetings. Maybe someday I'd want to share this new life with someone who actually wanted to be part of it. But for now, I was perfectly happy building something just for me. The garden was finished, but it would never really be complete. That was part of its appeal. Every season brought new growth, new challenges, new opportunities to improve and adapt. The koi were thriving, the plants were establishing themselves, and the waterfall was developing that natural sound that only comes with time and settling. I'd named the biggest koi Karma. She was a beautiful golden fish with black markings that looked almost like tattoos, and she had a habit of surfacing near the bench whenever I sat down with my morning coffee. I liked to think she understood that we were both starting over in the same small space, both learning to make the most of what we had instead of mourning what we'd lost. On this particular morning, exactly 3 months after the pool demolition, I was sitting on my bench watching Karma cruise through her domain when my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something made me answer it anyway. "Mr. Cross? This is Detective Richardson with the County Sheriff's Department. I'm calling about a Clara Cross. I believe she's your ex-wife?" My stomach dropped for a moment, wondering if Clara had finally decided to press charges for my more creative revenge tactics, but the detective's tone suggested something different. "She's been arrested for credit card fraud," he continued. "Apparently, she's been using stolen account information to make purchases. During questioning, she mentioned that you might have information relevant to our investigation." I thought about the credit card statements Marcus had uncovered, the pattern of fraudulent charges that had funded Clara's affair, and realized that some people really never learn from their mistakes. "I'll be happy to help with your investigation," I said, watching Karma surface near my feet like she was listening to the conversation. I have extensive documentation of fraudulent charges on accounts she had access to during our marriage. After I hung up, I sat quietly by the water, thinking about the strange journey that had brought me from discovering ripples in a swimming pool to sitting beside a koi pond while my ex-wife apparently continued her criminal career in new and creative ways. The garden whispered its quiet truth around me. Endings can be beautiful if you choose to rebuild on your own terms. Clara was still out there somewhere, still making the same destructive choices that had destroyed our marriage, still thinking she could lie and steal her way to happiness. But that was her story now, not mine. My story was about clear water, patient fish, and the satisfaction that comes from building something that belongs entirely to you. It was about morning coffee in the silence, about work that mattered, about sleep that comes easy when your conscience is clear. It was about learning that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well, while the people who wronged you continue to destroy themselves with their own choices. I finished my coffee, said good morning to Karma and her friends, and headed inside to get ready for another day of building things that would last. The pool was gone, but the foundation remained strong. They say you can't truly know someone until they've shown you their worst. I thought I knew Sarah, my wife of 12 years. She wasn't perfect. None of us are. But she had this way of turning the mundane into something magical. Her laugh could fill a room, and her plans, though often ridiculous, were always ambitious. But there's a thin line between ambition and recklessness, and I was about to learn just how far Sarah was willing to cross it. It started with the debt. I had no idea about it at first. She didn't say a word, and frankly, I didn't think to ask. We shared a roof, a son, and a life, but not everything, apparently. Not our financial troubles. I was the steady one, always calculating expenses, tucking away savings when I could, ensuring there was enough for Noah's school fees and our daily needs. Sarah, on the other hand, believed in living in the moment. And that's what she did. Now, I'm not here to paint Sarah as a villain. At least, not entirely. She had her dreams, and I respected them. But when her dreams started to require $20,000 that we didn't have, I'd have expected her to, at the very least, loop me in. She didn't. Instead, she went behind my back, took out a loan, and handed me a financial bomb with the timer set to explode in my lap. The day she left, it all came crashing down. I woke up to find her gone, along with her suitcase and my peace of mind. Noah was still asleep, blissfully unaware of the chaos waiting to greet me. I found the note on the kitchen table, scrawled in her loopy handwriting. I need to follow my heart. Handle the debt, Jacob. It's yours now. At first, I laughed. I don't know why. Maybe it was the absurdity of it all. Follow her heart? Was her heart on a yacht somewhere, sipping margaritas? Because mine was trying to figure out how I'd pay off a loan I didn't even know existed. And then there was Noah. How do you explain to your 10-year-old son that his mother has abandoned the family? You don't, not at first. You tell yourself that you'll shield him from the mess for as long as you can. But Noah isn't just any kid. He's sharp. Too sharp. I've always been proud of his intelligence, but in moments like these, I almost wish he weren't so perceptive. The house felt emptier without Sarah, not just physically, but emotionally. She had this way of filling spaces, even when she wasn't trying. Now, every corner seemed to echo with her absence. I stood in the kitchen, staring at her note, wondering where it all went wrong. Was it the fights? The arguments about money? The late nights I spent working while she planned trips we could never afford? Maybe it was all of it. Or maybe it was none of it. Maybe this was just who she was, and I was the fool for not seeing it sooner. But then, there was Noah. My anchor. My reminder that, no matter how much of a mess Sarah left behind, I still had a reason to keep going. He was my priority now. Not the debt. Not the betrayal. Just him. And so, I folded Sarah's note, placed it in my pocket, and made a silent vow. I wouldn't let her actions define the life we'd build moving forward. Of course, that was easier said than done. The cracks she left in our foundation were already starting to spread. I hadn't even begun to figure out the extent of the damage, and yet, the weight of it was already pressing down on me. Still, I clung to the one thing Sarah couldn't take from me, my resolve. Looking back now, I wonder if Sarah ever really understood what she was leaving behind. Not just me, but Noah, too. Did she think we'd be fine without her? Did she care? Maybe I'll never know. But as I stood in that kitchen, staring out the window at a future I couldn't yet see, one thing was clear. She'd made her choice. And now, I had to make mine. They say betrayal hits hardest when it's unexpected, but I can't say I didn't see the cracks forming. The problem is, even when you see them, you don't believe they'll break. Not until they do. And when Sarah left, it wasn't just my heart that broke. It was my sense of stability, my trust, and frankly, my pride. The first day after Sarah's departure, I found myself pacing the living room like a caged animal. Every step felt heavier than the last, weighed down by the questions I couldn't answer. Why hadn't she told me about the loan? How could she leave Noah behind? And, God help me, why did she think this new boyfriend of hers was worth $20,000 of debt and the destruction of our family? Noah found me staring blankly at the wall that morning. "Dad, are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with more concern than any 10-year-old should ever have to feel. I wanted to lie. I wanted to tell him that everything was fine, that his mom would be back soon, and that we'd all laugh about this one day. But Noah isn't a kid you can lie to. He has this way of looking at you, like he's peeling back the layers of your words to see the truth you're hiding. So, instead of lying, I gave him the watered-down version. Your mom needed some time away, I said, forcing a smile. She's dealing with a lot right now. His eyes narrowed, and for a moment, I thought he was going to call me out. But instead, he nodded slowly, like he was filing the information away for later. Okay, he said, but if you need help, just tell me. I can handle it. That one sentence hit me harder than Sarah's note ever could. He's 10 years old. He should be worrying about homework and soccer practice, not whether his dad can keep it together. And yet, there he was, offering me support like he was the adult and I was the one who needed looking after. As the hours dragged on, the weight of Sarah's absence grew heavier. I couldn't shake the image of her packing her bags, slipping out the door, and driving off to God knows where with some man I didn't even know. I tried to distract myself, cleaning the house, organizing bills, anything to keep my mind occupied. But nothing worked. Everywhere I turned, there was a reminder of her. The coffee cup she left on the counter, the perfume lingering on her scarf, the half-finished book on the nightstand. By evening, I was running on fumes. I sat at the dining table, staring at the pile of unopened mail, when Noah came in with a plate of peanut butter sandwiches. You didn't eat lunch, he said, sliding the plate toward me. I stared at him, my chest tightening. Thanks, buddy, I muttered, taking a bite more out of obligation than hunger. Noah watched me for a moment, then asked the question I'd been dreading all day. Is Mom coming back? I froze. How do you answer a question like that? Do you sugarcoat it? Do you give false hope? Or do you tell the brutal, unvarnished truth? I don't know, I said finally. But no matter what happens, we're going to be okay. I promise. He studied me for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, as if deciding to believe me. Okay, he said simply. But the truth was, I wasn't sure if I believed myself. How were we supposed to be okay with $20,000 of debt hanging over us and no plan to pay it off? How was I supposed to shield Noah from the fallout of Sarah's choices when I couldn't even shield myself? That night, after Noah went to bed, I sat in the darkened living room, running my hands through my hair and trying to come up with a plan. I felt like I was drowning, gasping for air in a sea of unanswered questions and impossible choices. But even as the weight of it all threatened to pull me under, I kept coming back to one thought. Noah. He was my anchor, the one thing keeping me grounded. I couldn't let him see me falter, couldn't let him feel like his world was crumbling around him. And so, I took a deep breath, squared my shoulders, and told myself that we'd figure it out. One step at a time. Because no matter how much Sarah's betrayal had shaken me, I couldn't let it break me. Not for my sake, but for his. You'd think finding out your wife ran off with another man would be enough of a gut punch. But Sarah had a way of making sure her betrayal had layers. The note she left behind wasn't just a declaration of her newfound freedom. It was a financial time bomb. And like an idiot, I'd been too numb to see it ticking. It was the day after she left when the first crack in her plan appeared. A letter arrived in the mail with bold red text across the top. Final notice. I opened it, expecting a routine bill, but instead, I was staring at a demand for payment on a $20,000 loan. Her name was at the top of the letter, but the fine print was clear. Our address was listed as the guarantor, and failure to pay would impact both of us. I read the letter twice, maybe 3 times, hoping the words would rearrange themselves into something less terrifying. They didn't. The debt was real, and it was now my problem. I could feel the anger bubbling up, not just at Sarah but at myself. How had I missed this? When had she even taken out the loan? I sat there at the kitchen table, my head in my hands, trying to piece it all together. Noah walked in, his face lighting up when he saw me. Hey, Dad. I found this article about robotics I want to show you later. You'll love it. His enthusiasm was infectious, but I could barely muster a smile. I was too consumed by the thought of how I was going to protect him from the fallout of Sarah's mess. Sure, buddy, I said, shoving the letter into the pile of mail on the counter. We'll check it out later. But later never came. Instead, I spent the evening digging through Sarah's things, searching for any clue about the loan. Her desk drawers were a mess of receipts and unopened envelopes, and I found nothing but frustration. Every dead end felt like another twist of the knife, a reminder that she'd blindsided me completely. It wasn't until I logged into our shared banking app that the full scope of her betrayal hit me. The savings account, the one we'd been building for years to secure Noah's future, was almost empty. A quick scroll through the transaction history revealed the culprit. Sarah had drained nearly all of it in the weeks leading up to her departure. Thousands of dollars, gone, with no explanation or justification. I slammed the laptop shut, my hands trembling with a mix of rage and disbelief. That money wasn't just numbers on a screen. It was supposed to be Noah's safety net, his college fund, our cushion against life's uncertainties. And she'd stolen it without a second thought. Noah must have heard the noise because he appeared in the doorway, his brow furrowed with concern. "Dad, is everything okay?" I forced a smile, though it felt like my face might crack under the effort. "Yeah, buddy. Just some adult stuff. Nothing you need to worry about." But Noah didn't buy it. He never does. He walked over to the table, his gaze falling on the stack of mail. "Is this about Mom?" he asked, his voice steady but soft. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to shield him from the truth, to keep pretending that everything was fine. But another part of me knew that Noah wasn't a kid you could lie to. Not convincingly, anyway. So, I sighed and gave him a version of the truth. "She left us with some problems," I said carefully. "Financial problems." Noah's eyes narrowed, and for a moment, he looked far older than his 10 years. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," I admitted. "But I'll figure it out. I always do." He nodded slowly, then pulled out a chair and sat across from me. "Maybe I can help." I almost laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was absurd. What could a 10-year-old possibly do to solve a $20,000 problem? But the way he looked at me, calm, determined, like he'd already made up his mind, stopped me short. "Thanks, Noah," I said, ruffling his hair. "But this is something I have to handle." He didn't argue, but there was something in his expression that made me uneasy. It was a look I'd seen before. The look he got when he was working on a project and wouldn't stop until he cracked the code. I should have known then that he was already plotting something, but I was too distracted by my own panic to notice. That night, after Noah went to bed, I stared at the loan notice again, my mind racing with questions. How had Sarah gotten approved for such a large amount? And why had she needed it in the first place? The answers felt just out of reach, taunting me like shadows in the dark. And then there was the matter of the savings account. If she'd drained it all, where had the money gone? Was it sitting in some offshore account, funding her new life with David? Or had she spent it already, leaving nothing but a trail of receipts and broken promises? I didn't have the answers, but one thing was clear. Sarah had left me with a mess I couldn't ignore. And as much as I wanted to wallow in anger and self-pity, I knew I didn't have that luxury, not with Noah depending on me. So, I did what I always do. I took a deep breath, rolled up my sleeves, and prepared to face the storm head-on. Because if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you can't outrun your problems. You can only face them one step at a time. You'd think that after discovering the $20,000 debt and the empty savings account, I'd hit rock bottom. But no. Rock bottom has a way of showing up when you least expect it, just to remind you how much farther you can fall. The next few days were a blur of bills, emails, and unanswered calls. I was trying to piece together a plan. Anything to stop this financial avalanche before it buried us. But every time I thought I was making progress, a new obstacle smacked me in the face. First, it was the realization that Sarah had used our address as collateral for the loan. Then, it was the demand letter threatening legal action if payments weren't made immediately. What made it worse was the suffocating silence. Sarah wasn't responding to my calls, texts, or emails. It was like she disappeared into thin air, leaving me to pick up the pieces of the mess she'd made. I couldn't even yell at her, couldn't demand answers. All I had was her note, crumpled in my pocket like a mocking reminder of how easily she'd walked away. And then there was Noah, my son, my anchor, my source of both strength and guilt. He didn't know the full extent of what was happening, but he knew enough to worry. I could see it in the way he watched me, his brows furrowed as if he were trying to solve a puzzle. And every time he said, "It's okay, Dad. We'll figure it out," I felt like a failure for not having a plan already. The turning point came one evening when I sat at the kitchen table, staring at the numbers in front of me. The math didn't lie. I couldn't make the payments on the loan and keep up with our other expenses. Something would have to give, and I couldn't let it be Noah. He needed stability, a roof over his head, food on the table, the sense that his world wasn't completely falling apart. But how could I give him that when everything else was crumbling? "Dad?" His voice broke through my spiral of thoughts. I looked up to see him standing in the doorway, his expression calm but serious. "Are we going to be okay?" I hesitated. The truth felt too heavy, but I couldn't bring myself to lie. "I don't know, buddy," I admitted, "but I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we are." He nodded, as if he'd expected that answer. Then he walked over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "It's okay. I've got an idea." I blinked at him. "An idea?" "Noah, this isn't something you can solve with an idea. It's $20,000, not a school project. Just trust me," he said, his tone confident in a way that both impressed and unnerved me. "You don't have to do this alone." I wanted to dismiss him, to tell him that this was an adult problem and he didn't need to worry about it. But something in his eyes stopped me. It wasn't just determination. It was understanding. He wasn't just trying to help. He truly believed he could. "So," I nodded. "Okay, buddy. What's your idea?" He grinned, and for the first time in days, I felt a flicker of hope. "You'll see," he said cryptically before heading off to his room. The next morning, I found him hunched over his tablet, his fingers flying across the screen. When I asked what he was doing, he simply replied, "Research." And when I pressed for details, he grinned and said, "You'll find out soon enough." At first, I thought it was a distraction, a way for him to feel like he was contributing. But as the days passed, I realized he was up to something. He'd ask me random questions about Sarah, her habits, and her favorite places. He even asked if I still had access to her email account, which I did, though I hadn't thought to use it. "Why do you want to know all this?" I asked one evening. "Just trust me," he said again, his eyes sparkling with that same quiet confidence. "I've got this." I didn't know what to make of it. Part of me wanted to push for answers, to demand he tell me what he was planning. But another part of me, a part one didn't quite understand, felt compelled to let him take the lead. Maybe it was desperation, or maybe it was the realization that he was smarter than I often gave him credit for. Whatever it was, it kept me from interfering. And as I watched him work, a strange sense of calm began to settle over me. For the first time since Sarah had left, I felt like we might actually come out of this okay. I didn't know how or when, but I believed in Noah. Looking back, that was the moment everything began to change. It wasn't just about the debt or Sarah's betrayal anymore. It was about us, me and Noah, proving that no matter how much she tried to tear us apart, we were stronger than she thought. And I'd soon learn that when Noah said, "I've got this," he meant it in ways I never could have imagined. When Noah said, "I've got this," I thought it was just his way of reassuring me, like a kid trying to lift a weight far too heavy for their little arms. But I was wrong, very, very wrong. Noah wasn't just offering empty words. He was orchestrating something far bigger than I could have imagined. It started with small, seemingly innocent questions. "Dad, do you remember when Mom got her new phone? Or did she ever tell you what app she liked to use?" At first, I thought he was just curious, maybe trying to process her absence in his own way. But as the days went by, his questions became more pointed. "Do you think Mom would have used the GPS app we all downloaded for our hike?" he asked one evening, his tone casual, like he was talking about homework. That made me pause. The GPS app. Of course. We'd installed it on all our devices after a family hike last year, when Noah pretended to get lost so we'd buy him a kid's smartphone. At the time, I'd laughed at his cleverness. Now, I wondered if that same cleverness was working overtime. "Noah, are you using that app to track your mom?" I asked, half joking. He looked up from his tablet, his face the picture of innocence. "Wouldn't you want to know where she is if you could?" I stared at him, half impressed and half horrified. "You can't just spy on people, Noah." "Why not? She left us, he shot back. His voice was calm, but his eyes burned with a determination I'd never seen before. She left you with her debt. She left me without a mom. And she's out there, pretending like we don't exist. That's not fair. Fair. He was right. None of this was fair. But what could I say? What could I do? Noah's logic was cold, sharp, and impossible to argue with. And the worst part? He wasn't wrong. Okay, I said finally. What did you find? He grinned, the kind of grin that made me realize just how much like Sarah he could be when he set his mind to something. I know where she is, he said simply. I blinked. You what? I know where she is, he repeated. She's staying at that fancy lodge by the lake. The one we drove past last summer. I didn't know whether to laugh or cry. My 10-year-old son had done in 3 days what I hadn't even considered doing. Noah, I said, my voice tinged with disbelief. How do you even know this? He shrugged, like it was no big deal. The GPS app. It shows her phone's location in real time. She's been at the lodge all week. And you didn't think to tell me sooner? I asked, my voice rising. I wanted to make sure I had everything, he said matter-of-factly. Her boyfriend's there too, by the way. His name is David. He works at her old office. And guess what? Mom used some of the loan money to pay for the trip. My head was spinning. It felt like I was trapped in a bad soap opera, except the script was being written by a 10-year-old genius with a vendetta. How do you even know his name? I managed to ask. I called her office while you were at work, he admitted. I said I was her son and asked if she was on vacation. One of the secretaries told me everything. People really like to talk if you sound sad enough. I didn't know whether to be proud or terrified. My son was 10 years old and already outmaneuvering grown adults. Noah, I said, rubbing my temples, you can't just do things like this. Why not? He asked, his voice calm but firm. She betrayed us, Dad. She left us with her mess. I'm just fixing it. He said it so matter-of-factly, like it was the most natural thing in the world. And maybe, to him, it was. But to me, it was a wake-up call. This wasn't just about the debt or Sarah's betrayal anymore. It was about survival. And Noah, my brilliant, stubborn son, was doing everything he could to protect what little we had left. Okay, I said finally. What's your plan? He grinned again, that same mischievous grin that reminded me of Sarah. First, we're going to freeze the loan account. Then, we're going to make sure she can't spend another dime. And after that, we're going to confront her. It sounded insane. It was insane. But as I sat there, listening to Noah lay out his plan like some kind of child prodigy mastermind, I realized something. This wasn't just about getting back at Sarah. This was about teaching her that she couldn't just walk away from her family without consequences. And for the first time in weeks, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. Hope that maybe, just maybe, we could come out of this mess stronger than before. All because my 10-year-old son refused to let us sink. 3 days later, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but something in my gut told me to answer. Maybe it was intuition. Or maybe it was the faint hope that Sarah had finally grown a conscience. Either way, I picked up, bracing myself for whatever storm was coming. Jacob, it's me. Her voice was sharp, frantic. The cool, detached tone she'd used when she left was gone, replaced by something I'd never heard before. Fear. I leaned back in my chair, gripping the phone a little tighter. Sarah, I said, keeping my voice steady. To what do I owe the pleasure? Don't play games with me, she snapped. What did you do? Why are the police asking questions about me? And why is my account frozen? I can't access any of my money. I almost laughed. The irony of her panic was delicious. You're asking me what happened? I said, my tone dripping with mock innocence. I thought you had everything figured out, Sarah. You've got your boyfriend, your freedom, and my $20,000. Isn't that what you wanted? Jacob, this isn't funny, she hissed. David's furious. He says I've dragged him into a legal mess, and now his boss is questioning him about the loan. What did you do? I didn't do anything, I said, enjoying the rare moment of calm in the chaos she had created. But our son? He might have outsmarted you. There was a long pause, the kind that stretches so thin it's about to snap. "Noah," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "What does Noah have to do with this?" "Everything, Sarah," I said. "While you were off living your best life, Noah was cleaning up the mess you left behind. He tracked your movements, reported your fraudulent loan to the bank, and froze the account before you could spend another dime." "That's impossible," she said, her voice trembling. "He's just a kid." "No," I corrected her. "He's our kid, and he's 10 times smarter than you ever gave him credit for." Her voice broke, teetering between anger and desperation. "You have to fix this, Jacob. The police are going to think I committed fraud. Maybe because you did?" I said, unable to hide the sarcasm. "You took out a loan using false information, drained our savings, and left your family with nothing. What exactly did you think would happen?" She didn't respond right away. I could hear her breathing on the other end, shallow and shaky. I didn't mean for it to go this far," she said finally. "It was just supposed to be a way to start over." I clenched my jaw, the weight of her words pressing down on me. "Start over? By leaving your son and me in ruins? Is that what starting over looks like to you?" "I didn't think," she began, but I cut her off. "No, you didn't," I said, my voice rising. "You didn't think about the damage you were doing, the mess you were leaving for Noah and me to clean up. You didn't think about anyone but yourself." For a moment, there was silence. And then she said something I wasn't expecting. "I'm sorry." I froze. It wasn't the apology itself that caught me off guard. It was the way she said it. Quiet, genuine, vulnerable. For the first time since she left, I heard the Sarah I used to know, the one I thought I'd spend my life with. But it wasn't enough. Not anymore. "Sorry doesn't fix this, Sarah," I said. "Sorry doesn't pay off the loan or undo the damage you've caused. If you really want to make things right, you'll turn yourself in and face the consequences." Her silence spoke volumes. I knew what she was thinking, that facing the consequences meant losing everything. Her freedom, her new life with David, maybe even her dignity. And she wasn't ready to let go of those things, no matter how much she claimed to regret what she'd done. "I can't," she said finally, her voice barely audible. "Then I can't help you," I replied. "Jacob, please," she begged. "David's threatening to leave me. I have nothing without him." "Maybe you should have thought about that before you walked out the door," I said. "But don't worry. I'm sure the police will help you figure it out." Before she could respond, I hung up. My hands were shaking, my heart pounding in my chest. It wasn't just the anger or the frustration. It was the realization that I didn't recognize the person on the other end of the line anymore. Sarah wasn't the woman I married. She wasn't the mother Noah deserved. She was a stranger. "Dad?" Noah's voice broke through my thoughts. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his arms crossed and a satisfied smirk on his face. She sounded scared. "She is," I said, forcing a weak smile. "You did good, Noah. You really did." He grinned, a mixture of pride and relief washing over his face. "So, what's next?" I sighed, the weight of the question settling on my shoulders. "We wait," I said, "and we make sure she can't hurt us again." Because if there's one thing I'd learned, it's that Sarah wasn't just running from her mistakes. She was running from herself. And no matter how far she went, the truth would always catch up to her. When the moment came to confront Sarah, I wasn't sure what I expected. Maybe I thought she'd crumble under the weight of her guilt. Maybe I thought I'd feel some sort of satisfaction seeing her face the consequences of her actions. But what actually happened was something I could have never prepared for. It started with Noah. He was the one who suggested we confront her in person. "She needs to know she can't just walk away," he said, his voice steady in that unervingly mature way he had. I couldn't argue with him. She'd left us with nothing but chaos, and it was time she faced the mess she'd made. The GPS app gave us her exact location. A luxury lodge by the lake, the kind of place we'd once dreamed of visiting together as a family but could never afford. The irony wasn't lost on me. Sarah was living our fantasy, but it was built on lies and stolen money. Noah and I drove out there the next morning. The closer we got, the more my chest tightened. Part of me didn't want to do this. Part of me wanted to turn the car around, go home, and pretend none of this was happening. But then I looked at Noah, sitting beside me with that determined look on his face, and I knew I couldn't back down. This wasn't just about me anymore. It was about teaching my son that we don't run from our problems, even when they seem insurmountable. When we arrived at the lodge, I spotted her immediately. She was sitting on the patio with David, sipping a cocktail and laughing like she didn't have a care in the world. My stomach churned. How could she look so carefree when she'd left nothing but destruction in her wake? Ready? Noah asked, his voice calm but firm. I nodded, though my hands were shaking as I got out of the car. Together, we walked up to her table. She saw us before we reached her, her smile freezing mid-laugh. For a moment, she just stared at us, her face pale, her eyes darting between me and Noah like she couldn't decide if we were real or just a figment of her imagination. Jacob, she said finally, her voice barely audible, what are you doing here? Taking back what's ours, I said, my voice colder than I expected. You didn't think you could just walk away, did you? David, who had been quietly watching the exchange, finally spoke up. Is this your ex? He asked, his tone more annoyed than concerned. Look, buddy, we're in the middle of something. Why don't you take your kid and— Don't, I said, cutting him off. My eyes locked onto his, and for a moment, the tension was thick enough to cut with a knife. This isn't about you. Not yet, anyway. Sarah's face turned red as she scrambled to regain control of the situation. Jacob, please, she said, her voice trembling. We don't need to do this here. Oh, I think we do, I replied, crossing my arms. Because you didn't just leave us with a broken family, Sarah. You left us with your debt. You drained our savings. And now you're sitting here, drinking cocktails like none of it matters. Dad, Noah said, his voice steady but sharp. Show her. I pulled out the stack of documents Noah and I had prepared, the loan paperwork, the empty savings account statements, the GPS logs showing her movements. I placed them on the table, one by one, watching as her expression shifted from defiance to panic. You're lying, she said, though her voice lacked conviction. I never meant for— Stop, I snapped, my patience wearing thin. You knew exactly what you were doing, Sarah. And now, you're going to face the consequences. David stood up, clearly uncomfortable with the turn of events. Look, I didn't sign up for this, he said, backing away from the table. I didn't know. Save it, I said, cutting him off again. You knew enough to run off with her. You're just as complicit as she is. Sarah's eyes widened as she realized David was about to abandon her. David, wait, she cried, reaching for his arm. Don't go. I'll fix this, I promise. But David was already walking away, muttering something about not wanting to get involved in family drama. And just like that, Sarah was alone. You can't do this to me, she said, turning back to me, her voice trembling. You can't take everything. You took everything first, Noah said, his voice cutting through the tension like a knife. You left us with nothing, Mom. Now it's your turn. For a moment, she just stared at him, her eyes filled with something I couldn't quite place. Guilt? Regret? Fear? Whatever it wasn't enough to undo the damage she'd done. This is your chance to make it right, Sarah, I said, my voice softer now. Turn yourself in. Take responsibility for what you've done. Show Noah that you're better than this. She didn't respond. Instead, she buried her face in her hands, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. It was the first time I'd seen her break since she left, and for a moment, I felt a pang of pity, but it wasn't enough to change my mind. Let's go, Noah, I said, placing a hand on his shoulder. We've done what we came to do. As we walked away, I glanced back one last time. Sarah was still sitting there, alone at the table, surrounded by the evidence of her betrayal. And for the first time since she left, I felt a sense of closure. After the confrontation, there was no going back, for Sarah, for me, or for Noah. That moment at the lodge had been the final nail in the coffin of whatever semblance of family we had left. Now it was time to clean up the wreckage she'd left behind. The first step was filing an official report with the police. I explained everything, the fraudulent loan, the drained savings account, and how she had abandoned us with a mountain of debt. Noah, ever the meticulous planner, had all the supporting evidence ready to hand over. The officers were impressed by how thorough it was, though I had to deflect a few questions about how a 10-year-old had gathered so much information. The officers assured me that the case was solid. Sarah had committed fraud when she falsified information for the loan, and with the bank involved, there was no avoiding the consequences. A warrant was issued for her arrest, and I was told the investigation would take its course. It was a bittersweet moment. On one hand, I felt relief knowing that justice was finally catching up with her. On the other, it hurt to know that Noah had to witness his mother's downfall at such a young age. But Noah, as always, seemed unfazed. "She made her choice, Dad," he said as we left the police station. "Now we just have to make ours." The next step was dealing with the loan. I contacted the bank and explained the situation, providing proof that Sarah had committed fraud. After what felt like an eternity of back and forth, they finally agreed to cancel the loan, pending the results of the investigation. The relief was almost overwhelming. The $20,000 no longer hung over our heads like a guillotine, and for the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe again. With the loan sorted, I turned my attention to securing Noah's future. I met with a lawyer to ensure that Sarah's actions wouldn't jeopardize our stability any further. The lawyer helped me file for sole custody of Noah, citing Sarah's abandonment and financial recklessness. It was a straightforward case. Sarah hadn't just left us. She'd essentially forfeited her right to be a parent. The custody hearing came and went with little fanfare. Sarah didn't even show up. I was granted full custody, along with a court order requiring her to pay $500 a month in child support. I didn't expect her to actually pay, but the lawyer assured me that her wages, if she ever got a job, could be garnished to ensure compliance. As for the camper van, it was time to cut my losses. The vehicle had been sitting in the driveway since we retrieved it, a constant reminder of Sarah's betrayal. I decided to sell it, using the proceeds to rebuild our savings. It wasn't much, certainly not the $35,000 it had originally cost, but it was enough to give us a fresh start. Through it all, Noah remained my rock. He took on more responsibilities at home, helping with chores and errands without being asked. One evening, as we sat together folding laundry, he said something that stuck with me. "You know, Dad, I don't think Mom was happy," he said, his voice thoughtful. "Not with herself, not with us, not with anything. Maybe that's why she did what she did." I looked at him, amazed by his insight. "You're probably right, Noah," I said. "But her unhappiness doesn't excuse what she did. We all have to take responsibility for our choices." He nodded, his expression serious. "I'm glad you're my dad," he said after a moment. "You don't give up." His words hit me like a punch to the chest. All the doubt, all the guilt I'd been carrying about not protecting him from Sarah's actions seemed to lift in that instant. I realized that while I couldn't control what Sarah had done, I could control how we moved forward. And that's exactly what I intended to do. The last piece of the puzzle was finding a way to ensure Sarah couldn't disrupt our lives again. I worked with the lawyer to place restrictions on her ability to access Noah or our finances without court approval. It wasn't foolproof, but it gave me peace of mind knowing that she couldn't just waltz back in and undo the progress we'd made. By the time the dust settled, it felt like a lifetime had passed since Sarah walked out the door. But in reality, it had been just a few short months. In that time, Noah and I had gone from being victims of her betrayal to survivors of it. We had weathered the storm together, and though the scars were still fresh, they were a testament to our resilience. I wish I could say that Sarah learned her lesson, that she turned her life around and became the person I once believed she could be. But life isn't always tied up with a neat little bow. The last I heard, she was working odd jobs and struggling to stay afloat. Part of me felt sorry for her, but I knew better than to let that pity pull me back into her orbit. She made her bed. Now she had to lie in it. The storm had passed, but its aftermath lingered, leaving cracks in the foundation of the life Noah and I were rebuilding. Yet, for the first time in what felt like forever, we had hope. Hope that we could move forward, not as a broken family, but as a stronger one. It started with the little things. Mornings became calmer without Sarah's chaotic energy dominating the house. Noah, ever the problem solver, took it upon himself to organize our days. He made a color-coded schedule for chores, schoolwork, and downtime. Efficiency is key, Dad, he said one evening, holding up a chart that could have rivaled the work of any corporate planner. I couldn't help but laugh. You know you're 10, right? You're supposed to be worrying about video games, not chore schedules. Someone's gotta keep this place running, he replied with a smirk. It was moments like these that reminded me just how much he'd grown in the past few months. He wasn't just my son anymore. He was my partner, my teammate. Financially, things were stabilizing. Selling the camper van had given us a small cushion, and with the loan canceled, the pressure on my shoulders eased considerably. I picked up extra shifts at work when I could, determined to rebuild the savings Sarah had drained. It wasn't easy, but every dollar I saved felt like a small victory, a step toward a future where Noah and I didn't have to look over our shoulders. Noah, of course, was always finding ways to help. One afternoon, I came home to find him standing at the kitchen counter, a tray of cookies cooling beside him. "What's this?" I asked, raising an eyebrow. "I'm starting a cookie business," he said matter-of-factly, handing me a flyer he'd printed at school. 50 cents a cookie. All proceeds go to the Jacob and Noah Recovery Fund. I burst out laughing, the kind of deep, cathartic laugh I hadn't felt in months. "You're something else, kid," I said, ruffling his hair. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. There were moments when the weight of what we'd been through hit me like a freight train. Nights when I'd lie awake, replaying Sarah's betrayal in my mind, wondering if there was something I could have done differently. And then there were the times I saw the sadness in Noah's eyes, the moments when he thought I wasn't looking. He missed her, even if he didn't say it outright. She was his mom, after all, and no amount of anger or disappointment could erase that bond. One night, as we were sitting on the couch watching a movie, he turned to me and asked, "Do you think she'll ever come back?" I paused, caught off guard by the question. "I don't know, buddy," I said honestly. "But if she does, it'll be on our terms. She'll have to prove that she's ready to be the mom you deserve." He nodded, his face thoughtful. "I don't think she will," he said quietly. "But that's okay. We're doing fine without her." Hearing him say that broke my heart a little, but it also filled me with pride. Noah had every right to be angry, every right to feel abandoned. Yet, he'd chosen to move forward, to focus on what we had instead of what we'd lost. As the weeks turned into months, life began to feel normal again, or at least a new version of normal. We found joy in the small things, cooking dinner together, playing board games on the weekends, or just sitting on the porch, watching the world go by. There were no grand gestures, no life-changing moments, just the quiet, steady work of rebuilding. One evening, as we were sitting at the table eating dinner, Noah looked up at me and said, "You know, Dad, I think we're going to be okay." I smiled, my chest swelling with pride. "Yeah, buddy," I said. "I think we are." But even as we moved forward, I couldn't shake the lessons we'd learned. Sarah's betrayal had left scars, but it had also taught us resilience. It had shown me the depth of Noah's strength, his unwavering loyalty, and his incredible ability to adapt. And it had reminded me of my own strength, the strength to protect, to persevere, and to build a life for my son, no matter the odds. Looking back now, I realized that Sarah's leaving wasn't the end of our story. It was just the beginning of a new chapter, one where Noah and I could write our own rules, free from the chaos she brought into our lives. The road ahead wasn't perfect, and I knew there would be challenges. But as I watched Noah finish his dinner, already launching into a detailed plan for his next school project, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time: peace. Because no matter what came next, I knew we'd face it together. And together, we could handle anything.